talking, it's just a tad cooler than I was hoping. And so, last year I got pretty cold when I was on the porch of the bookstore, and so I opted for, being in my car.
Okay.
So I'm in my car, it's fine, I'm not driving, I'm not moving, but I am warmer than I would be, sitting outside.
You do have
Oh,
like 2
goodness
jackets
gracious.
on, it looks like.
I'm bolstered, I'm ready.
Okay.
Got hot coffee, I'm good.
Are you sure you're from Minnesota?
You gotta have your mic on, I think.
I forgot
All
the
right,
mic was on
are we
when I
ready
was
to,
chatting.
are we ready to get started?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, February 5th, 2024. This is a study session of the Minnetonka City Council. I will call this meeting to order, and let's go around the room and do introductions. And is Miranda in the far corner? If she is, we'll start with Miranda.
I'll start. Sarissa Falk, Senior Management Coordinator.
Corinne Heine, City Attorney.
Mike Funk, City Manager.
Patsy Foster Bolton, Ward 1.
Kimberly Wilburn, City Council at Large.
Rebecca Shack, Ward 2. Kizzy Copley, Ward 4.
Deb Calvert, at large.
Paula Ronelli, Ward 3.
Marna Dahman, Assistant City Manager.
Julie Wishnock, Community Development Director.
Jace Alexander, Senior Diversity Equity Inclusion Coordinator.
Scott Borbin, Police Chief.
Will Manchester, Public Works Director.
Kelly O'Day, Recreation Director.
Kevin Ringhofer, the Minnetonka Community Housing Team, and Mills Church.
And I'm Brad Wortham, the mayor. So thank you for indulging me as I travel, but let's see, we've got a very full agenda tonight, and what I would like to say is that I met with Mike this afternoon, and we're gonna work real hard at keeping things on time. I think the goal is to be done by 9 o'clock, and Mike and I shared some thoughts on how long each section should take. So the first thing on the agenda, I gotta make sure I can read this, it's a little dark in here, is our DEI Commission. And I believe Miranda is going to introduce that, and then we will hear from Jace Alexander. So I'll turn it over to the two of you. Miranda.
I sure can. I have Jace Alexander here tonight, Senior DEI Coordinator, who will be the staff liaison for this commission and has some really great ideas to jump starting the commission, so I'll let him take over.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jace, welcome.
Hey, Mayor and Council, good to be here. Good to see you all. So I'm gonna just walk you through a few questions that I had for you, and then if you have any thoughts or additions that you'd like to add when I finish up, happily take those notes. So these are the 4 questions that were in the packet that I'm going to go over with you one by one. So does the City Council support the staff recommendations regarding meeting logistics? So right now, the recommendation, or as the ordinance is written, it's once per month, no less than 6 times a year. Right now, we're recommending a meeting at 6:30 for the day of the month, second Wednesday of the month. We're open to Thursdays. When we sat down to look at the calendar, a lot of the spaces are booked out right now, and so that might look differently next year because we'll be a fully formed commission and be in on the ground floor when we start again. But that's why there's a little discrepancy there. Thinking about having the first meeting Wednesday, March 13th, because there are no open Thursdays until May. And thinking about convening in here in the Minnehaha room for the first year, and then potentially transitioning to council chambers in 2025. I froze.
So Jace, do you want us to comment on each of those as you go through them, or do you want to go through your full presentation and then have us comment?
Yeah, I'll go through the whole thing. I'm
Okay.
just
Just a quick back on the PowerPoint.
trying to move to the next slide.
Did you click back on the PowerPoint? It's currently on the mayor.
There you go.
Yep.
I got you. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I see what the cursor is.
Okay. So the second question, does City Council support the proposed meeting topics? And so these are just some of the things that we're hoping to hit initially, but selecting a chair and a vice chair, doing some orientation, working with Corrine for the legal considerations and requirements so everyone knows what's expected of them and how things work, figuring out how communications will work, looking at our meeting calendar, going over what your expectations are for us as a council, looking at what our budget might be, doing some team building, and then really a focus on some common language because DEI, as you know, is huge, and so we got to make sure that we're on the same page when we say equity, when we say race, when we say ethnicity and religion and socioeconomics, we're on the same page for what those things mean for us. So that'll be kind of some of our grounding work that we'll do initially. And then here are some of the expectations for 2024. So reviewing the work that we've already done around DEI, looking back to around 2016, so we'll look at like the DEI task force and what came of that and what things we have in place right now. Reviewing our mission, roles, and responsibility. We'll use our strategic profile to try to create some action steps so that we're in line with what we want as a city. We'll look at that racial equity dividends index, do a little bit of a deeper dive. So again, we can make some action steps as a commission. And then looking at creating a 2024/25 work plan is the goal. So there's a lot to do, hoping for sure like by November we can start looking ahead to 2025. And then another thing we're going to try to do is collaborate with other cities and partners so that we can utilize everyone's resources and kind of pool together so we can celebrate more things. You know, one thing we heard in the interview panel was everybody wants to get together and gather and celebrate, whether that's around food or dance or culture. And so the reality of that is we only have so much money, so how can we work with our neighboring cities to try to put on more together is what we'll be looking at. And then establishing the annual joint DEI commission / city council meeting so that you can come together and discuss what it is you'd like for us to do. We're also looking at, for this summer, I'm working on something that I'm calling Parks in Proximity, so I'm hoping the DEI Commission could help with that, and looking at different neighborhoods and different apartment complexes, and kind of doing like a walking tour to like nearby trails or parks or whatnot. A lot of people don't even know how close they are to some of these things, and so helping folks realize where they are in terms of the city, what parks and trails are available to them, so that everyone can utilize all the great stuff that we have. So that's something we'll be working on too. And that's the plan. So any comments, questions, happy to field them.
Mayor,
Council members? Go ahead.
thank you. I mentioned this to Mike this morning, and you know, one of the things, I think this is a great outline. I think it's it's organizational but it's also a tall order. There are a lot of things that need to be done, and you know, it's not going to be a situation where you're blazing a trail year one. I like the joint council commission meeting, and I think there's a real opportunity there for our first meeting to help collaborate then on the 2025 work plan, so that we're not being overly prescriptive because that, you know, we're concerned about that, but also we're not leaving this commission out to,
Flapping.
you know, flapping in the wind, wanting more direction. So if I have my plug is for using that first joint meeting as an opportunity to really try to hone in on some of the goals for then 2025 and beyond.
Sounds great.
Council members, other comments?
Yeah, I'll talk, Brad. So, so
And then Kimberly after you, thanks.
okay, thank you. It is, one thing I would say is I get worried that if it's less than once a month, we'll lose momentum, especially at the beginning. So that's just one of the things, and I totally agree with Councilmember Shack on, you know, how I think that is a great opportunity for us to collaborate and, you know, hear what some of the ideas are and provide some feedback to the commission. And one of the things that I was thinking about today also, because you have a limited budget, is how can we enhance our existing like large citywide events with a lens on, you know, some of the things that the candidates, some of whom are now on the commission, had, like World Food Day. Like, what could we do for Summer Festival or some other, you know, citywide thing where it would just sort of be an add-on. And maybe it's something we have to do, like with the other cities. And the other thing that I would say is, I think the big heavy lift is how do we reach the people that we need to reach. And so I think the whole community engagement, you know, solving that puzzle is going to be really important to make sure that we are doing the things that are important to the community and the people on the commission. So, but that's what comes to me, and I agree. It's a good. I do like what the expectations are, and I also feel like this is a building block for the future. So we're laying the foundation, and I think that we need to set a plan for 2025, and also not be afraid to keep building on. You know, once we've laid the foundation, people sort of have their sea legs and know how things work. You know, to take on additional subject matter. So I'm not worried about this being superficial. I just want to make sure it's not superficial. I think they are going to be drinking through a fire hose for the first year getting this off the ground. So.
Thanks, Deb. Kimberly?
Yeah, so I just have a question about the Wednesday, Thursday. So you're saying Thursday is a problem because there's not meeting rooms available?
Yeah, there's other commissions and whatnot, or people taking up space, yes. That's what we found when we looked at the calendar.
And you want to be in this room so there's the ability to record? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I believe the only commission that isn't recorded right now is the senior advisory. Otherwise, people are either in here or they're in the city council chamber.
Right. Yeah, I was just wondering if we need to record for the first year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just something to consider. That I know that the minutes are capped, and that's the record for the ones that don't have recordings. I don't know, it might, again, with a new commission, it might be a little easier to gel and work things out if you're not being recorded, but.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I honestly didn't know that was an option. So that's good to consider. Yeah.
Council members, other comments? Kizzy?
Yeah, I was thinking, I was one of the questions that we were going to talk about, whether it need to be recorded or not. And so I think I kind of like the idea for the first year, maybe not being recorded, because it's going to be a learning curve, and it's going to be a lot of work in the beginning when making the foundation. So I don't think it's necessary to be recorded. And then I kind of like the idea what Deb was saying in regards to once a month. I can't really see sometimes when, you know, you're just meeting once a month, it's like it's so far in between, people could lose momentum and they can feel like, well, what are we really doing? We're just having this conversation, and so maybe doing more.
Could you guys go to the bathroom?
Yeah, you could go.
I wouldn't know.
All right,
Good evening, everyone.
Okay.
He looks like he's laying down.
Well, I'm not laying down, but I am stuck in my, it's just a tad cooler than I was hoping. And so, last year I got pretty cold when I was on the porch of the bookstore, and so I opted for being in my car.
Okay.
So I'm in my car, it's fine, I'm not driving, I'm not moving, but I am warmer than I would be sitting outside.
You do have
Oh,
like two
goodness
jackets
gracious.
on, it looks like.
I'm bolstered, I'm ready.
Okay.
Got a hot coffee, I'm good.
Are you sure you're from Minnesota?
You gotta have your mic on.
I forgot
All
the
right,
mic was on
are we
when I
ready
was
to,
chatting.
are we ready to get started?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, February 5th, 2024. This is a study session of the Minnetonka City Council. I will call this meeting to order. And let's go around the room and do introductions. And is Miranda in the far corner? If she is, we'll start with Miranda.
I'll start. Sarissa Pollock, Senior Management Coordinator.
Green Heine, City Attorney.
Mike Funk, City Manager.
Patsy Foster Bolton, Ward 1.
Kimberly Wilburn, City Council at Large.
Rebecca Shack, Ward 2.
Kizzy Copley, Ward 4.
Deb Calvert, at large.
Paula Romeoli, Ward 3.
Marna Dahman, Assistant City Manager.
Julie Wishnak, Community Development Director.
Jace Alexander, Senior Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Coordinator.
Scott Borbin, Police Chief.
Will Manchester, Public Works Director.
Kelly O'Day, Recreation Director.
Kevin Ringhofer, the Minnetonka Community Housing Team, and Mills Church.
And I'm Brad Wortham, the mayor. So thank you for indulging me as I travel, but let's see, we've got a very full agenda tonight. And what I would like to say is that I met with Mike this afternoon, and we're gonna work real hard at keeping things on time. I think the goal is to be done by 9 o'clock, and Mike and I shared some thoughts on how long each section should take. So the first thing on the agenda, I gotta make sure I can read this, it's a little dark in here, is our DEI Commission. And I believe Miranda is going to introduce that, and then we will hear from Jace Alexander. So I'll turn it over to the two of you. Miranda.
I sure can. I have Jace Alexander here tonight, Senior DEI Coordinator, who will be the staff liaison for this commission and has some really great ideas to jump starting the commission. So I'll let him take over.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jace. Welcome.
Hey, Mayor and Council. Good to be here. Good to see you all. So I'm going to just walk you through a few questions that I had for you. And then if you have any thoughts or additions that you'd like to add when I finish up, happily take those notes. So these are the 4 questions that were in the packet that I'm going to go over with you one by one. So does the City Council support the staff recommendations regarding meeting logistics? So right now, the recommendation, or as the ordinance is written, it's once per month, no less than 6 times a year. Right now, we're recommending a meeting at 6:30 for the day of the month, second Wednesday of the month. We're open to Thursdays. When we sat down to look at the calendar, a lot of the spaces are booked out right now, and so that might look differently next year because we'll be a fully formed commission and be in on the ground floor when we start again. But that's why there's a little discrepancy there. Thinking about having the first meeting Wednesday, March 13th, because there are no open Thursdays until May. And thinking about convening in here in the Minnehaha room for the first year, and then potentially transitioning to council chambers in 2025. I froze.
So Jace, do you want us to comment on each of those as you go through them, or do you want to go through your full presentation and then have us comment?
Yeah, I'll go through the whole thing. I'm
Okay.
just
Just a quick back on the PowerPoint.
trying to move to the next slide.
Did you click back on the PowerPoint? It's currently on the mayor.
There you go.
Yep.
I got you. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I see what the cursor is.
Okay. So the second question, does City Council support the proposed meeting topics? And so these are just some of the things that we're hoping to hit initially, but selecting a chair and a vice chair, doing some orientation, working with Corrine for the legal considerations and requirements so everyone knows what's expected of them and how things work, figuring out how communications will work, looking at our meeting calendar, going over what your expectations are for us as a council, looking at what our budget might be, doing some team building, and then really a focus on some common language because DEI, as you know, is huge, and so we got to make sure that we're on the same page when we say equity, when we say race, when we say ethnicity and religion and socioeconomics, we're on the same page for what those things mean for us. So that'll be kind of some of our grounding work that we'll do initially. And then here are some of the expectations for 2024. So reviewing the work that we've already done around DEI, looking back to around 2016, so we'll look at like the DEI task force and what came of that and what things we have in place right now. Reviewing our mission, roles, and responsibility. We'll use our strategic profile to try to create some action steps so that we're in line with what we want as a city. We'll look at that racial equity dividends index and do a little bit of a deeper dive. So again, we can make some action steps as a commission. And then looking at creating a 2024/25 work plan is the goal. So there's a lot to do, hoping for sure like by November we could start looking ahead to 2025. And then another thing we're going to try to do is collaborate with other cities and partners so that we can utilize everyone's resources and kind of pool together so we can celebrate more things. You know, one thing we heard in the interview panel was everybody wants to get together and gather and celebrate, whether that's around food or dance or culture. And so the reality of that is we only have so much money, so how can we work with our neighboring cities to try to put on more together is what we'll be looking at. And then establishing the annual joint DEI commission / city council meeting so that you can come together and discuss what it is you'd like for us to do. We're also looking at, for this summer, I'm working on something that I'm calling Parks in Proximity, so I'm hoping the DEI Commission could help with that, and looking at different neighborhoods and different apartment complexes, and kind of doing like a walking tour to like nearby trails or parks or whatnot. A lot of people don't even know how close they are to some of these things, and so helping folks realize where they are in terms of the city, what parks and trails are available to them, so that everyone can utilize all the great stuff that we have. So that's something we'll be working on too. And that's the plan. So any comments, questions, happy to field them.
Mayor,
Council members? Go ahead.
thank you. I mentioned this to Mike this morning, and you know, one of the things, I think this is a great outline. I think it's it's organizational but it's also a tall order. There are a lot of things that need to be done, and you know, it's not going to be a situation where you're blazing a trail year one. I like the joint council commission meeting, and I think there's a real opportunity there for our first meeting to help collaborate then on the 2025 work plan, so that we're not being overly prescriptive because that, you know, we're concerned about that, but also we're not leaving this commission out to,
Flapping.
you know, flapping in the wind, wanting more direction. So if I have my plug is for using that first joint meeting as an opportunity to really try to hone in on some of the goals for then 2025 and beyond.
Sounds great.
Council members, other comments?
Yeah, I'll talk, Brad. So, so.
And then Kimberly after you, thanks.
Okay, thank you. It is, one thing I would say is I get worried that if it's less than once a month, we'll lose momentum, especially at the beginning. So that's just one of the things, and I totally agree with Councilmember Shack on, you know, how I think that is a great opportunity for us to collaborate and, you know, hear what some of the ideas are and provide some feedback to the commission. And one of the things that I was thinking about today also, because you have limited budget, is how can we enhance our existing like large citywide events with a lens on, you know, some of the things that the candidates, some of whom are now on the commission, had, like World Food Day. Like, what could we do for Summer Festival or some other, you know, citywide thing where it would just sort of be an add-on. And maybe it's something we have to do, like with the other cities. And the other thing that I would say is, I think the big heavy lift is, how do we reach the people that we need to reach? And so I think the whole community engagement, you know, solving that puzzle is going to be really important to make sure that we are doing the things that are important to the community and the people on the commission. So, but that's what comes to me, and I agree. It's a good. I do like what the expectations are, and I also feel like this is a building block for the future. So we're laying the foundation, and I think that we need to set a plan for 2025 and also not be afraid to keep building on, you know, once we've laid the foundation, people sort of have their sea legs and know how things work, you know, to take on additional subject matter. So I'm not worried about this being superficial. I just want to make sure it's not superficial. I think they are going to be drinking through a fire hose for the first year getting this off the ground. So.
Thanks, Deb. Kimberly?
Yeah, so I just have a question about the Wednesday, Thursday thing. So you're saying Thursday is a problem because there's not meeting rooms available?
Yeah, there's other commissions and whatnot, or people taking up space, yes. That's what we found when we looked at the calendar.
And you want to be in this room so there's the ability to record? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I believe the only commission that isn't recorded right now is the senior advisory. Otherwise, people are either in here or they're in the city council chamber.
Right. Yeah, I was just wondering if we need to record for the first year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just something to consider. That I know that the minutes are capped, and that's the record for the ones that don't have recordings. I don't know, it might, again, with a new commission, it might be a little easier to gel and work things out if you're not being recorded, but.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I honestly didn't know that was an option. So that's good to consider. Yeah.
Council members, other comments? Kizzy?
Yeah, I was thinking, I was one of the questions that we were going to talk about, whether it need to be recorded or not. And so I think I kind of like the idea for the first year, maybe not being recorded, because it's going to be a learning curve, and it's going to be a lot of work in the beginning when making the foundation. So I don't think it's necessary to be recorded. And then I kind of like the idea what Deb was saying in regards to once a month. I can't really see sometimes when, you know, you're just meeting once a month, it's like it's so far in between, people could lose momentum and they can feel like, well, what are we really doing? We're just having this conversation, and so maybe doing more than once a month, especially for this commission that's so important. I think it probably would be better to do more than once a month. And overall, I think the foundation and the topics is good. So, yeah.
Anyone else?
Paula.
Paula, Brad?
Yeah.
Yep, hi Paula. Go
Hi.
ahead.
You can't see me over here, so.
I can't see you. That's why, there you are, I see you.
There you go. That's fine. I want to just concur. I'm not going to add to the comments that other people have made, other members have made. I would say with the timing, I think it's going to be a lot to ask of people to try to coordinate more than once a month. If you're going to go that route and want to see that, I would maybe suggest task forces or subcommittees that might want to get together to kind of move things forward. The other two things I think I mentioned to you at one point, just so you're not reinventing the wheel, the Eden Prairie We Fest might be a model to take a look at. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The second thing, I guess, having sat on a lot of boards and things like that, especially new ones, it's always nice to kind of have a couple of wins under your belt. So hopefully try not to get too bogged down in process and all of that, and maybe from the beginning have a couple of small projects that you can keep in mind, because otherwise I know that sometimes people can get discouraged if it's just talk, which is important, all that's necessary, but if alongside maybe there's kind of a couple of small projects and things that you're doing to outreach to kind of make people feel that they're doing something tangible and meaningful right from the get-go. That's it.
Great. Anyone else?
I had one other thing, Mayor, and that was just making sure that we're engaging our businesses on this. I was talking with a friend this week, and we were talking about this, and just being an African American man walking into a business is sometimes a very different experience than it is for a white person, and I just want to figure out how we can engage our businesses to be part of this really important work.
Thanks for that. I agree with the comments that have been made. I think that being Deb's point about being intentional, about making sure that if meetings are once a month, they happen once a month, and that we don't have canceled meetings and so forth. I think really working to get a minimum of 10 and ideally 12 meetings in the first year, I think that's important. And I really agree with what Paula said, is let's find a way to get some early wins, because we want this is a new undertaking for the city. We want it to be successful. And then what Kimberly said too, I think, getting our sea legs, whether it's recorded or not, I think it's important that we meet. And, Thursdays have some challenges, Wednesdays have some challenges. One question that I would have would be, is the need for the Minnehaha room the reason that space would not be available? Or is it just generally that space is not available, just given the demands on the community center and so forth? So, I think it's nice to record, but I don't think it's necessary in that first year, as has been said. So I think there's some options there, but I think it is important that the commission has, those meetings at least monthly. And I like the idea of subcommittees if more meetings are needed, rather than increasing the frequency of meetings, because that's just harder to do initially. So those are my top line thoughts. Anyone else?
Mayor, I would add that when we looked at the calendar, it wasn't that the spaces weren't available. We were trying to avoid having two commission meetings on the same night. And so
Yes.
Thursday nights are planning commissions and EDAC meetings, and then Wednesday nights are park boards. Tuesday night is Sustainability Commission. The reason we avoided Tuesday nights is if we eventually want to live stream these meetings, we have very limited IT staff on Tuesday nights. They're actually in different communities. So we're anticipating eventually one day live streaming it.
Yeah.
And so Tuesday nights wouldn't be an option. So we're trying to wiggle in some space and not have two meetings in the same nights. There is generally a free Thursday a month, open in a month. Just one. But it wouldn't be available till May due to holidays, spring breaks, and already scheduled meetings. Depending on the commission's availability, that may be the first time we can meet. We're going to try for March, but the first meeting is going to be all about orientation, so we need everybody there. So it may be in May the first meeting can happen, but Jace is going to try really hard to do it in March, but it's already February, so we're really going to try hard there. So that was the conflict. It wasn't necessarily the room availability, it was other commissions' availability.
Does that,
Miranda, thanks very much for that clarification. That's
Here.
very helpful.
Mayor,
Yes.
so does that clear things up though, knowing that it's not gonna have to be recorded? Does that help?
It could, but I think we do still want to try to avoid having 2 commission meetings on the same night. So not really.
But it doesn't sound like there's a night available where there's not commission.
The second Wednesdays, and then we could do the off Thursday. Was kind of our
Okay.
only options. So,
I don't.
One of the challenges with more boards and commissions.
And Brad, this is Mike. Just to clarify, again, I think it's been said, but I do want to just clarify in terms of recording. Again, just a refresher for everyone. By state law, there's no mandated provision for live streaming or even audio recording or video recording. What is required is the minutes. Minutes are the official record of the city. And in the staff report, there are some nuances to all the commissions because not all of them do it exactly the same way. And what I heard here this evening was not recording, but I want to clarify, not audio recording and not video recording. So make sure we're clear on that. Is that your wish on those? Because that does make a difference on the room. Because if you do want to audio record, like study sessions, these are audio recorded. That's the microphones. So we record those and eventually go on our website. So there is still, you could record them and not post them, or just not record anything at all. That's why I just want to make sure I'm clear on what the direction is.
I don't have super strong feelings about it, except that, and that includes some of the people that are sitting on the council now, there have been strong voices about transparency and having information recorded. So, if it makes it easier, it's not a high hill I'm going to die on. If it's easier not to record it, then, and we can get the meetings done, that the work is the most important thing. But I just think for purposes of transparency of the important work that they're doing, I think that is also important, and I'm very sensitive. I'm not, I think people are freer to speak if they don't feel like they're on camera, on a microphone. On the other hand, again, we get to the transparency issue, and it's something we all have to adjust to. So.
Excuse me, in the interest of time, why don't we just kind of go around and ask council members what their preference is for this year one, and just the first one, and then that way Mike and Jace can count noses and decide what the council's preference is, and then we can move on from this. So if you just like to go down the line and indicate whether record yes or record no, then we can provide them some direction.
Record no.
Yeah, record no.
I agree that there will be uproar if we don't record. So I guess I would say record yes.
No.
I'm with Rebecca. Yes.
Yes.
Gee, thank you. I think I'm going to go with record yes, just because I am sensitive, and we've all had experiences where when people don't like what's happening at the city council level, people pull out the T word, and
Yep.
I think we're safer being more transparent than less transparent.
Yep.
And I would leave it up to the commission then. If they feel strongly about it, they can report that back to the council, and perhaps we could change that decision. But I think initially let's play it safe, and I would agree with record yes. So that's 4-3. That's not a vote. That's just opinions, and I'll leave it up. It's up to staff to recommend.
Yeah, thank you, Brad and Council. That is helpful, and not to belabor this conversation because I know we're trying to keep things moving. But a follow-up question to that is, we certainly can record them like tonight, and then once they're recorded, they are public data. So if someone asks for them, obviously we would need to release it. My question though is, do you want them posted on the website like we do with study sessions and other meetings?
I think as a record yes person, I would say let's start with just having them. And if this is something that becomes an issue, we can reevaluate. But
Okay.
let's have them, and that will be very helpful, I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I would say, just have them have something on the website saying recordings available upon request or something so that people know and see if we get anybody requesting them.
Good compromise.
Yes, any difference of opinion on that?
All right, thank
I
you.
think that's a good approach. And the other data point that I'd be interested in is how often is staff asked for access to recorded meetings? I don't need to know that now, but that might, as we look at in the future, let's go to the data and say, okay, well, we have the record and nobody ever looks at it, or we get quite a few requests. Just a sense for how that is used would be helpful, I think.
All right.
But for now, I think we have a direction that we have them, but don't post them.
All right, thank you, Brad. Thank you, council.
Anything else, or we can move on to the next item? Jace, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm good.
All right, so item 3B is the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And I think, Julie, I think you're going to tee that up, and then we'll hear from Lauren as well.
And the consultant as well, so come on up.
Well, very good.
Here you
And I bet
are.
the consultant has a name.
Yes, hang on. All right, I think you're on the wrong slide there. If you could just forward it and then, oh, thank you. You ready? Okay, perfect. I thought I'd just tee it up with some background in terms of where we've been on this climate journey, if you will. And I think a lot of folks think that just because the Climate Action Plan has been drafted and it was no small feat, don't let me downplay what just happened. But there's been some climate work going on kind of since, I think really seriously since 2019, when we had some interest from the Climate Initiative Group that started to talk to the city about things that they were concerned about, ideas that they wanted the city to implement. And then, if you recall, in that period of time, the city adopted its first kind of community-led energy action plan. And that was the first time that folks were really having a seat at a table and talking about what the city goals were, strategies specific to energy action. And then that turned into kind of the city outlining the process, kind of like what you just did with the DEI Commission, but you outlined the process to establish the Sustainability Commission. So that kind of took up 2020. And then in March of 21, I can't believe that's almost 3 years ago already, the first meeting of the commission actually occurred. And they started working on their own plans and their own work plans, which you get to see every year and approve. And then they did an update to their energy action plan in 22 as well. So really that work of the climate action plan happened mostly in 2023, but we're here now finally with the draft of the plan. We're going to ask you some specific questions, and it's hard to remember these. We'll get back to them at the end, but as we go through the presentation, I just wanted you to think about goals and specific targets identified in the plan. I think when we were meeting as staff, that was one of the harder things to kind of get our mind around, is why are we using this goal and what's the basis for it? So we'll spend some time on that. Also, achieving those greenhouse reduction goals, how are we doing that? Strategies and actions, and then any comments that you might have. Now, I think knowing some high blue energy on the council, there might be lists of things you want to change, which is great. I think for the sake of tonight's discussion, because we have about 45 minutes, maybe if you have a list of things, you can send them to Mike and he'll make sure we get those changes and we can add them to the list of things to address with the Sustainability Commission when we look at everybody's comments. Just so you know that since the document has been posted on the Minnetonka Matters page, 11,000 people got an email and said, hey, go check out the plan. Actually, 279 people downloaded it. I thought that was pretty good because sometimes with a document that large, you don't necessarily want to look at the whole document. But remember, there's a lot of public process that you'll go over as you present, kind of why people might not really care about the plan itself because they've kind of cared along the way. So don't be afraid of that number. And then we've received 15 comments thus far. Now, if you're a city council that wants to kind of track the comments, go ahead and just get that QR code up. And you can actually track the comments that are coming in live form. So like if you go to that link right now, you'll find about 15 comments sitting there. Just pay attention to the date when they came in. There was some early on when we first started doing the plan, and then when we did the plan, or the posting of the plan just recently, there's more comments. So pay attention to the ones in January or thereafter. So that'll keep populating, so watch that along the way. So I'm gonna hand it over. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell them how long you've been working on this plan.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Lydia Major. I lead landscape architecture, and I should have a mic on.
Oh, sorry. Then the mayor can hear you. Because the mayor is from afar, if we didn't tell you that.
Yes, I am from afar, and I can hear you, so keep going.
Okay, very good. So I lead the landscape architecture and planning studio at LHB. We were hired along with Local Climate Solutions to work on this plan for you in 2023. It has been a really enjoyable and interesting process with a lot of community engagement, as was mentioned earlier, a lot of thinking with staff, and I hope a meaningful document in draft form for you to think about tonight. My plan is to briefly do what you see on the screen up above, a little document outline overview, briefly revisit community engagement, spend most of our time on the goals and targets and the greenhouse gas reduction scenario, then talk a little bit about the strategies and actions, and finally next steps. Does that sound like a suitable use of our time? So I'm going to roll through this fairly quickly. I understand we are pressed for time, but I am at your behest, so if you have questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. Okay, the document cover looks like this, and it includes an executive summary, introduction, existing conditions summary, community feedback, goals and targets, greenhouse gas reduction scenario, strategies and actions, and an appendix. This outline is in response to what we were hearing during the community process and from staff in terms of what would be useful to you. I am not going to dwell on the executive summary or the introduction. Feel free to read all the lovely words that you'd like at your leisure. I did want to mention that the existing condition summary is a summary of a separate document that you also have. It's going to be in the appendix of the final document. It's also already been available online. Staff has commented on it, etc. So it's kind of like a summary of a summary. It includes lots of important things: community profile, the hazards we see, community-wide greenhouse gas, vulnerability, etc., and finally settled on opportunities. And it was all built out in advance of the community engagement that we did, so that we could have a shared understanding to present to the community before we started talking to them, and also so that we could have that sort of shared understanding with staff as we went into developing the goals. The spread you see in front of you now represents months of work and 850 plus individual responses to the community engagement process. We had an online survey that was very well received. We did focus groups focused on human services, natural resources, and businesses. I don't know why that says upcoming. It is definitely in the past. We did pop-ups at Everything Electric and many apartment buildings, which I do have to give a shout out to Drew Ingleson, who is not here tonight, but he did a lot of legwork for this to help us reach some of those people who don't normally show up for processes like this. So we really appreciated those extra efforts on his part. And we did have a community open house as well. So the community engagement information in the document itself summarizes all that. It has wonderful graphs and other descriptions, lots of quotes scattered throughout the whole document to use the words of the people who came to us and talked to us about climate action in Minnetonka. So hopefully that's very useful. You mentioned transparency in the last item. I will say that all of the minutes And all of the pictures that were taken and all of that is available. It's in the appendix. It's also already online. So anybody who has questions about community engagement has a wealth of information at their fingertips, and happy to get more into that. Okay, so let's spend a little more of our time then on, unless there's questions, but roll? Okay. So we have a vision for resilience and adaptation, and I do want to define it. It's defined in the document, but we're kind of talking about two things, right? So there's action and adaptation, or action and mitigation, which is our efforts to slow climate change and what we can do in Minnetonka on that front. And then there's adaptation and resilience, the things that we can do to deal with the effects that we know are coming, regardless of what action we may take now. So the most important element that we heard is the sort of overarching vision focusing on preserving natural resources, strengthening community connections, and preparing our infrastructure. We heard this over and over again from folks all across the spectrum of interest in climate, how important the natural resources are in this city, how they wanted to feel like taxpayer dollars were being spent wisely, and that we were doing all that we could in advance to prepare Minnetonka. So we have a proposed greenhouse gas goal. Our first goal is in 2030 to reduce community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 63% per person from 2018 levels. And then our goal by 2050 is to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we got there. So this is a science-based goal. This is something we heard was very important. We wanted to be based in science when we were considering how to set this goal. There's an intergovernmental panel on climate change, and this is all aimed at keeping climate change below that 1.5 degrees Celsius that you may have heard about in the news. So that gets us to a science-based goal. We also heard that we wanted to be fair share. So there's a entity called One Planet City Challenge, and it talks about how cities will have to lead the way. If you think about where greenhouse gas emissions are coming from and where we have the most ability to make these impacts the soonest, in some cases that is the cities. And so therefore you see our goal ticks down just a little bit there to meet those fair share targets, which in speaking to both staff and the Sustainability Commission was important. Also, hearing from those folks, Minnetonka wants to be a leader. And so again, we looked all around Minnesota and sort of compared our goals to other communities and either wanted to be in line or slightly ahead of some of what we were seeing from other communities. We're not trying to be like on the bleeding edge of this one. We're trying to be smart and again, science-based and fair share. So we're not way out on the leading side, I would say. We're sort of heading that way, if that makes sense. So that's how we got to those overall goals that were mentioned earlier. So again, overall, that's 63% by 2030 and the net zero by 2050. I could pause there, but I think that the next section is going to tell you a little bit about what it would take to get there, which is probably what a lot of you are kind of questioning. Should I move forward, or do you want to ask questions at this point?
Keep going.
Okay, great. So.
I want to know the answer.
I know.
Yes.
Oh gosh, don't we all? So, this is a big goal, and it takes a lot of effort, but we want to be very, very clear with you that the city of Minnetonka is not acting alone. You are acting in the context of market forces that are already pushing us in the right direction and government forces at the federal, state, and county level, along with other partnering cities that are doing other similar actions. So what you see on the screen right now, and what's much easier to read in your document, are all of those other things that are taking us from what would have been the business as usual line at the top, down, drifting relatively close to those stars that are the goals that you set for yourselves. So all of this is the context for the action steps that we're recommending for Minnetonka specifically to get from that bottom little piece of yellow, which actually represents what we expect to happen in waste reduction, down to the goal that you're actually looking for. So, what does it take to get from that wedge that I just showed you down to the stars? We are going to be looking at 4 major areas of local action. Enforcing energy code, pursuing funding for efficiency and electrification, starting with new builds, but quickly moving into existing structures. Support the clean energy transition, sorry, my words, and then proposing local vehicle travel reduction efforts. These are the biggest ways that Minnetonka can impact climate action in order to reach those goals that you've set. There will be additional action in these areas, which are outlined in more details as you look at the strategies and actions list. So,
I found this on the web.
Oh, it's letting me watch.
I thought I muted you. I don't think the web is going to be enough use to us at this point. So here you can see strategies that are helping us get to those starred goals. So we're layering in the local action into the efforts around business efficiency, home efficiency, clean electricity, less driving, and clean vehicles. It's both, right? And then reduce, reuse, and recycle. So those are the greenhouse gas focused goals and the reduction scenarios. Then we move into the specific strategies and actions, which I think is probably the most tangible and exciting part of the document, for me at least. It goes through climate-friendly homes, climate-friendly businesses, and climate-friendly Minnetonka. And in each case, it has a narrative that describes a variety of different actions. It offers resources on how to achieve those actions, and then it offers different tools like the one you see up here. This is the one for climate-friendly homes that the folks who would actually need to implement this can use. So in the case of climate-friendly homes, we're looking on the left side of the spread up there at a list of potential actions that an individual or a family could take. And then on the right is an opportunity for them to write down the strategies that might apply to them. And then there's resources in the document for each one of those different strategies in order for them to get more information. And of course, the City of Minnetonka's website is one of the major resources that people can use. There's lots on there already. So this is the example for climate-friendly homes. The one for businesses looks fairly similar. The one for the City of Minnetonka looks different. The one for the City of Minnetonka is more of a spreadsheet style. In fact, we will be delivering it also as a spreadsheet so that it can be more of a living document and folks can go through and use it and move things around on it. It talks about priority, impact, etc. So there's sort of different tools depending on who's going to be using it, right? I did just want to overview without going into the long list of strategies and actions. But as you might expect from what I showed you about what kinds of actions in general are going to be needed to meet your goals, and layering also on the adaptation goals that we need, so the things that will help us deal with changing climate realities. We have strategies that are all over the board in terms of helping with all of those things. So some of the actions in here will help with climate action, but a lot of them are about how can you adapt your yard to be more resilient as things move forward? How can you be more prepared for extreme weather events in your home or business? So it kind of goes all over in that and helps people think very broadly about strategies that may realistically help them be more prepared in the face of what's coming. Climate-friendly businesses is fairly similar. It does address a few things that we hope that businesses could do, like support different commuting methodologies and be more prepared, for instance, maybe generators for a grocery store or something like that, so that they can be part of your resilience planning. And then a good long list for the City of Minnetonka itself. We want the City of Minnetonka to show leadership. It's clear to me that staff is very interested in that, as is the Sustainability Commission and other folks we've talked to. We look at education and engagement. We're talking about incentives and then policies and programs to support all of these goals. So that is the overview of the document. I did just want to put it back in context that we are accepting comments right now. And we will be doing so for a couple more weeks. Then we'll be looking through all those comments for the ones that we will be responding to. We will go back to the Sustainability Commission on March 19th, and then we are hoping for adoption by this council in April on Earth Day.
And then if you could go to the next slide. Again, these are kind of the questions that we started off with. And I think, and Lauren, you can help out too in terms of what you need from the City Council. But I think it's important to know that the Sustainability Commission also weighed in on what you see in front of you, in addition to all of the community input that you received. So there was a fair amount of discussion with Sustainability Commission already about setting those goals and targets. And again, some of the strategies can get you down into the weeds quite a bit. So hopefully we're thinking a little bit higher level in terms of the goals. And then also, I think that understanding it's city-wide. This is not about city operations. 1%, do I have it right?
Yeah.
1% of the whole greenhouse gases emitted from our city are coming from the city. Means we should have leadership, of course, but we're trying to think of it in terms of the total city and all of the parts of the city. So I think that's, again, kind of hard to think in those terms because I don't know of another document that is that big in its scope. So those are challenges to the council as you discuss. Lauren, anything else you want to add?
I think just looking forward, when we start to receive public input, which we have already on the website, as we kind of close out the public input in a couple of weeks, what that'll look like going forward, and maybe you'll have questions on that too, is a compilation of all of the responses, all the input, and we'll put those into kind of groups of topic areas, and looking forward, how those are addressed, in what context, things like that. Lydia's team has done that in the past. We've done that with other documents in the past. We basically want to create a big spreadsheet that goes through and is really transparent about how we look at everything and how we respond to it appropriately. So that's kind of, response to people that have given us comment. It just doesn't go into a vacuum and gone. We'll give a response in some fashion. So we'll look forward to that as comments roll in, which I'm sure will be quite a few in the next couple of weeks, based on the input so far.
Right, and we should have lifted up Drew's work here. I know he's not here tonight, but know that he is an integral part of the whole work that you see in front of you. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it back to you to run through any responses to these questions, and we'll take down your sharing part.
All right, well, thank you very much. I spent a lot of time with the plan over the weekend. I'm very impressed with what I've seen, and just want to provide opportunities for the council to comment, and then specifically on the goals and targets and the questions identified. But any general comments from council members before we get into that? Anyone?
Mayor, I'll just make a couple very quick ones. One was there are a couple of items that were in the plan that I just wanted to make sure get explored a little bit as we go through the adoption process. One is on page 71. There was a comment about not altering view shed in some development projects, and that can be a sticky wicket. So I just want to make sure that we're not hampering a good development, because in general, view shed is not a property right, and of course we don't want to, so I'll try to keep it short so I won't go into that, but that's one thing. And then the other thing is on page 80, the vehicle parking minimums are kind of a controversial subject, and there are municipal groups that are fighting that here in the suburbs. And while I understand the impetus behind it, I think that is also, it can be problematic in areas where we actually have managed to establish vitality, where parking is just a huge issue. Of course, we want to address that over time, and I'm hoping parking minimum, eliminating them, will become less an issue. But those were two of the biggies, and the only other one, because I have a long list that I did send to Mike, is in construction materials, a lot of them are petroleum-based. And so it just is sort of this circular firing squad of, producing petroleum-based building materials that cause greenhouse gases, are actually toxic, but help us achieve affordable housing. And so then also the intersection of affordable housing and some of our climate goals, which can also be a little bit mutually exclusive sometimes. So exploring that a little.
Thank you, Deb.
Mayor,
Yes.
Mayor, I just want to respond to just one of your items on the page 71. The view shed comment, it's actually in the comp plan now. So it's just reciting goals and statements in the comp plan. And it does talk about view shed, but it's really about these linear corridors of transportation. I think that's the reference. It doesn't we could probably pull the whole reference in there. It actually would make more sense if we had the whole thing referenced.
I figured.
I think we just have a piece of it, and I think we should probably.
I just wanted to make sure it was clarified.
No, that's a good point.
That was my whole point.
Okay, thank you.
Any other general comments? Paula, is that your hand behind the?
It is, just one quick
Behind the pole there that I can't see? Oh, there we go, okay.
Quick comment and rejoinder to Deb, having just been at the Ellers workshop and learning a lot about TIFs. I think there might be an opportunity to incorporate into our TIFs going forward for affordable housing, so sustainability standards, and I hope that that'll happen. Look forward to other ways that we can help in I know you're going to be providing us with some information about cost sharing, upfront cost sharing, things that other communities are doing. So I'm looking forward to learning from other communities and also, trying to maybe do some innovation in terms of TIFs. I know Julie's on the forefront of that and doing some great work. And so seeing how we can incorporate sustainability goals and maybe even a residential TIF. So if homeowners improve their properties by doing things like putting in heat exchange pumps and other energy efficiencies in the context of doing some redevelopment or remodeling, that somehow they postpone the ding in their property taxes somehow. And that may be a county thing as well, but basically making TIFs for residents where they don't get it, maybe. Just a thought.
Thank you. Any other comments, anyone?
Yeah. So.
Yes, thank you, Kimberly. I didn't see you. You were off screen.
That's fine.
Yes, ma'am.
No problem. And I will send a list to Mr. Funk, so I won't go through all of that. One, I appreciate all the work that has gone into putting this together, so thank you. One thing I think that is missing that I think will be there before the final draft, but is how are we measuring how are we measuring, what are our metrics? What are we looking at, like, a year from now? How are we measuring success or, progress? And then just when the mention of this spreadsheet that's going to have the different comments and how we respond to this. I was just on the EPA Climate Change Adaptation Resource Center site today, and they have you can go by region, so Midwest region, and then you can look at different areas, water quality, et cetera, et cetera. And part of their site is they can have resources on why climate adaptation is important. And I say that because just glancing at some of the comments, there are some people who are like, this is ridiculous, we shouldn't be doing this, let's not spend any money. And I don't want, I don't want to condescend people. So I don't know, I don't know how much effort, but I think there should be some sort of resource to say, this is why. This is why we're doing this. This is why it's important. And I know there is in here some of the science behind it, but in response to some of this. So yeah.
Mayor, if I can just
Yes,
add.
Julie.
So the metrics, that's an interesting observation because that's all we've been doing for, I mean, we have 15 years.
Yeah.
So if you didn't maybe explain the, how long we've been doing this and why and when that all started.
Yeah, so the city of Minnetonka does track these emissions already, and we will be able to very carefully measure how things are going. And you have great data going back, which is when you look at some of the graphs, you can see how things have been ticking over time. You can kind of tell where the pandemic happened because you can see the change in commuting habits, things like that. So that's all because we already are getting great data from Minnetonka, and we'll be able to continue to use that data to track progress.
And if they just wanted to look at the data itself, they can go on.
Regional indicators.
Yeah.
It's a great resource, super fun. You can live in there for a long time if you're a data geek.
Yeah. So, but I like what you said, Kimberly, because we know that. It's always in our head. We know where to go. It's not apparent to the reader where that information sits. So I think that's a good point. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an important.
Oh.
Mayor?
Yes.
Okay. I think my comments
Rebecca.
kind of straddle both of these, so I'll just speak once and be done. One of the things that came to mind, and I think we got the email from MCI today, and that triggered that a little bit too, which is, we get these plans, whether it's the post plan or the public safety study, and I think people look at that and say, okay, is this going to sit on a shelf? How are we going to really implement it? What does 2025 look like? What does what are we going to do each year? And they want to see that in this plan, and for all kinds of reasons that doesn't make sense because that we can get way off. So I think it would be helpful in communicating, and it's not even a discussion so much for today because I think we understand that this will keep coming back and we'll keep reworking and resetting micro goals. But in communicating to the residents in the community to make it clear, okay, now what? We're gonna approve this in April, and then what happens next? But I think this is I was so impressed. It far exceeded my expectations. I think the goals are lofty, but attainable, and I think that's where you want to be with something like this. So very well done, and you certainly can see Drew's fingerprints. I mean, if you know Drew at all and you know his passion, it's really cool to see the progress that he's made in this area. So very, very well done to everyone.
All right. Thank you,
And I-
Rebecca. And next, Paula.
Oh, just
I'll
real
wait.
quick.
I'll wait.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No,
Just
go
real
ahead.
quickly, again, also I failed to say that it is just fantastic work. But secondly, I just assumed, and I got the same email from MCI, and my response was, obviously, these are kind of the macro strategies for a certain part, and I assume that, specific action steps will be taken just like they are for other plans. And then those will be broken down and displayed on the dashboard. We'll have a dashboard for this plan, just like we do some of our other plans. Is that correct? Was I making the correct assumption?
We'll see.
Okay, all right.
We'll try.
All right.
We've been too splashy lately, I think.
Uh,
Yes, we're going to try. Yes.
No, oh, no, Julie's next.
But
Go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to talk about Rebecca's comment on implementation. So, and it kind of dovetails into what you were saying. As I see this, it's a lot of different things that the city does where you might see this implementation kind of coming to light. So it's the work plan for the Sustainability Commission. It will be in your CIP. It will be in the EIP. It'll be in lots of already big things the city does. So my hope is that when staff are creating those documents, they go to this plan, they say, okay, what did we say about, Give me an example. Help me out here. What did we say? Fleet. What did we say about Fleet? And there's a comment in there about Fleet and what the city is thinking about doing and how they're strategizing about Fleet. So I think that's the point of it, that it's kind of an all-encompassing, but the Sustainability Commission work plan is kind of that like go-to place where I would think you'd find most of it. So that's how I envision the implementation, but we should talk about it. We should maybe bolster that area a little bit, so.
Patsy?
And then I was just going to comment, kind of piggyback on you guys, on Rebecca and Kimberly's, is that, you know, based on just briefly the comments, like there is a benefit to the residents. Like there's, you know, you don't use as much water if you plant native plants in your yard and stuff like that. That isn't clear to them, like other things that look, you know, well, I don't want to spend my taxpayer money on this. Well, look, you're going to actually be saving money, kind of like, and having that be really, really basic.
The cost
general
benefit.
Kind of, yeah, but something that, well, frankly, I can understand, if I can understand it, because this is awesome and it's great, but people just aren't going to take the time. I think most residents, but they just want to know, like, what's in it for me? You know what I mean?
That was clear from the surveys.
That is.
If I could offer one observation of the community engagement that we got, people were surprisingly interested in spending their own time, money, and habitual change to take climate action and mitigation.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes we sell ourselves short by saying that we hear these naysaying comments, and of course those folks are out there. Even those people were very interested in things that would protect the trees in the city of Minnetonka, that would save them money, that would protect their home from climate impact. So those folks showed up for our community engagement, and even they had a stake in what they were hearing about. So I do want to put a little positive spin out there about how interested people are in taking action, and they're willing to be partners in that. So, 2 cents.
And Mr. Funk, I believe you have a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And then after me, Kizzy has a question or comment as well.
Great.
Just really quick on Patsy's comment, just about educating people in the why, going back to, I think, what's been said. We haven't talked about it at this point yet, but I would just say to council, once this gets more solidified, our communications team will be involved. And so for community development, and Lauren and Drew and Julie that will look towards implementing this once it becomes finalized, we have to educate folks. And so we will have our communications team involved. We'll have a communication strategy in terms of what we push out, the messaging that we push out, the narratives that we push out. It'll keep coming up in our newsletters. And so there's a whole effort yet to come in terms of, I think, that whole educational piece where communications will play a vital role in that.
And then Kizzy?
I have more of a comment or maybe a kind of a question. I know that we talked about, we went out to apartments and surveyed apartment building folks that stayed in apartment buildings. My question is, how are we going to bring those folks along too, especially with anything around climate and energy efficient is so expensive, not only for, you know, just like low income families, people who live in apartments. I don't know, are we planning on giving the apartments incentives to even increase efficiency in their buildings? And that's kind of what my thoughts are. Every time I think about climate, I think about how we're going to bring everybody along with thinking about climate issues, because people are trying to survive and live, and they're not really thinking about, if I have water runoff in my yard, can I put a green garden in my yard? Like, all of that costs a lot of money. So what do we plan on doing? Like, I mean, that might be in the weeds of things, but that's always going to be my go-to thought.
Yeah, and Councilmember.
Thanks, Kizzy. Julie, do you have a comment?
Lauren does.
I've got this.
Okay, Lauren, great.
Yeah, thank you. We're actually doing some of that, greetings. We're actually doing some of that already with our multiple family. I should do that, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Respect everybody else here.
Yeah.
We're already doing that today with multiple family building outreach, where we're we're using our Green Corps people to go out and meet with those owners and some of the management staff to get them into programs for energy reduction, waste reduction. So that's some of that's occurring right now. That'll continue going forward. We just need to find the right programs and match up people better with those. There's also things more at a unit level that we'll have to explore further, like what can you do as an individual tenant of those buildings to, reduce your demands on things. So.
And
yeah.
don't you think that was an early on, we had a discussion internally when we were looking at some of the plan work, that we wanted to make sure there is not only homeowner material that we provided, but there was a version of it in a renter scenario, because I think a lot of the documents that we see out there just is very silent to the renter, and I think LHB did a really good job of trying to here's your to-do list if you're a homeowner, here's your to-do list if you're a renter, here's your to-do list if you're a business owner. So I think all of those things have helped, but I think anything that would be additional to that would be helpful if people are picking up on things that we did not, but yeah.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that comment. Oh, excuse me.
All right, I've got a couple quick comments, but I also want to make sure that we don't overlook the questions that were teed up here too, to make sure that we're providing input on the specific goals and targets identified, achieving the greenhouse gas reduction goals, and then the strategies and actions to achieve those goals and build climate resilience. So I want to make sure that we get all of those comments. I had a couple of quick overview comments. One, I thought this was very well done. And frankly, when I read it, I found it to be encouraging. I felt that there were real action steps that we can take to achieve real goals that are important and that are quantifiable. And so that I found that to be very encouraging. The second thing is, as we talk about a dashboard, I think a little bit about the quarterly reports we get on our strategic plan and our strategic profile. And I see that same sort of reporting routinely on how we're doing on these things. And I'm not sure on the exact frequency, but I think that is an ongoing need and something I'd like to see. And then the third thing, there was a little thing in here that, well, not a little thing, but a thing that made me wince a little bit. And it's on page 44, where we talked about partnering with the Minnetonka School District, but we didn't say anything about the Hopkins School District or the Wayzata School District. And we all know that Minnetonka has the Wayzata School District, the Hopkins School District represents more of Minnetonka than does the Minnetonka School District. So I'm hoping that that was just an oversight and not intentional, that we're only working with one of our school districts rather than all of them.
We actually, I think, Mayor, want that wording to be schools only rather than school district, because we have a lot of charter schools as well. So we need to just say schools.
How about schools in Minnetonka?
Right.
Rather than
There you
Minnetonka
go.
schools, because that sounds like we're talking about just one school district.
Right. That's a good wording. Thank you.
All right, so, and Julie, I want to make sure that we're getting you the questions answered that you've laid out. So,
No, just again, just a reminder, if you have lots of, maybe small or large things, whatever, you can share them with Mike and he will make sure we get them. We are going to close public comments on February 18th. We'll be doing, I don't know how many more media pushes do you think, Lauren? That we 2 more maybe?
Yeah, that's
2.
Yeah.
So you'll see it on Facebook and some of those other places so that you can kind of push it to the people that you know as well. And then go to the 19th Sustainability Commission. So that's kind of the next couple of steps. And thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. And I know they do too. So thank you. And thank you for your good work. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Well done.
well,
It was awesome.
thank you all. And we're doing really well on time, so that's positive as well. So, we'll keep going. I think, item 3C is the community survey. And I will turn it over to Miranda to introduce our guest. And then I think after we do 3C, we'll take a 5-minute break so people can plan for that. I will turn it over to Miranda.
Hi, everybody. I am very honored to welcome Peter Leatherman here tonight. Normally Peter doesn't join us for this meeting. So this meeting we usually bring it to council and ask for themes and feedback from council as we prep for our community survey for the year. I, as assistant city manager, have had the survey on my lap for, I think this position's had it on their plate for a very long time. With Sarissa's recent promotion, she is taking over the community survey. So this is something that she'll be working on this year and for years to come. We're excited to watch her grow in this area too. And so with Peter here tonight, we're going to be talking about themes. So themes that the council has. The last few years, I've tried to take really good notes. I give them to Peter, and Peter asks me 10 questions, and I have no answers to them. So it's going to be really great tonight that if you have themes, you can bounce them off of Peter, who writes all the questions and navigates the survey with us. As always, we're trying to cut questions. We did a really good job last year, but we do also have some work to do this year. Which we will do on our side, but do please keep that in mind as you're throwing out themes. But Peter has really great knowledge of not only our city and our past, but really Metro and Minnesota wide. So a really great resource to bounce your themes and ideas off tonight, and then he will help us navigate how to write the questions and try and capture the outcome of what the council wants to learn from your themes and questions. So with that, I'll introduce Peter and let him take over.
It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I know there are a couple new council members, so I know many of you have heard presentation before, know the process. Does anybody have questions, new ones, any background you want to learn, or should we just get into what sort of topics and questions you're interested in learning more information about?
Any questions for Mr. Leatherman?
Nope.
You know, Peter, I'm going to throw out one. I received a letter from a resident, and I know you've touched on this for our council, but we had a conversation, I think, when you were last before the council on methodology and why a telephone survey. And I had a resident write to me and say, well, that seems antiquated and old-fashioned, and I think there are some very specific scientific reasons for why that is the best way to get information from residents. But if you could just touch on that for a moment, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll do the Cliff Notes version of it, because you could go on for an entire, you could do a whole semester on the difference between,
we don't want to do that.
Between qualitative and quantitative research. Yes, I guess it's antiquated in the sense, but since 2007, we've included cell phones in the mix. And with a telephone survey, a random sample, if everybody has an equal chance of being included in the sample, it's the only way to get a representative sample. Online surveys have their own inherent biases. You have 5% to 10% in communities that don't have access to the internet to start with. You also have a demographic divide on who's going to go on and fill out a survey. On the flip side, some companies still do mail-out surveys. The joke I always make is my 21-year-old doesn't know where the mailbox is, much less is he going to go take a survey out, fill it out, God forbid, find a stamp, put it back in the mailbox, and then do it that way. So you have inherent biases to start with. Also then, once you get through that process, you have biases within who responds. And it's interesting right now, a shift. We've done controlled mail-out surveys and internet surveys in the past, where, everybody gets it, but we randomly select 400. I would say in the last 5 years, this is my 30th year of doing this. So the first 25 years, the bias was if you had an issue, if you had an axe to grind, you were always the first one to respond. Just think about a restaurant review or a hotel review. You're going to go complain. But what we're starting to see now is groups trying to win surveys, especially when there's something specific in a survey. So like working with the Minnetonka School District on their levy, parents would try to win the survey and overrepresent. So you have all these inherent biases. At the end of the day, they are data gathering. You can get data from it, but you have to treat it for what it is. If an internet survey comes in and says 50% feel this way, unlike the survey where you can say within plus or minus 5%, all they can say is 50% of those who chose to respond feel that way. And then you have to look at the demographics. I just was talking with another suburban city manager, and they used an online version, and in a community of 80,000 people, they had 7 African Americans respond in the sampling. Doesn't even close to the reflection of who's going to respond. So that's the short version. The only way to get quantitative data still is to have randomness in the process. That there's no agenda, everybody has an equal chance in order to be included in the sampling.
Thank you very much. I didn't mean to knock the train off the tracks, but I thought it was important because it's a question that does come up.
Yep, every year, every city, every school district, always, yes.
So go ahead.
I have one question, Mayor, and that is, you know, we have these wonderful boards and commissions, and I'm wondering, do you ever get, do we ever gather questions from them? Like, they're working on things sort of in a more, like I'm thinking about sustainability, they're sort of focused on, you know, one area. We're kind of generalists here. Are we, you know, do we ever ask them about something that they think we should take to?
I think we know what's on their minds, don't we, Mike? We hear every meeting what people are thinking about. So I mean, that I think is inherent in the questions we ask, right, to be included.
Correct. I think Julie, Brad and Council, I think, Julie's correct in that. Rewind the clock a little bit. This process did not include the council not too many years ago, and so really staff pulled it together, and then staff would pull it together based on really anecdotally what we hear from our council, what we hear from boards and commission members. We get to know them really well because we spend time together. But not specifically have we asked them for feedback, no. But we do, I think, have a really good understanding of the issues just based on the agendas that are put together and the conversations that take place.
Thanks, Mike.
Question? Should we talk about new topics, areas of interest?
So, go ahead.
If I may, I've just got a couple things. One thing that I think is a follow-up from last year was he talked about some, you know, trails came up and I think connectivity was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we're going to talk about, and there's some question about, do we have adequate resources to really build out some of these maybe this really expands to recreation, but you know, is there an appetite specifically for trails, increase in franchise fees, and for recreation? I mean, looking at maybe some of the demographics at the marsh and where the resources are coming for that. You know, do people want to sponsor more recreation with taxpayer dollars, not necessarily just self-sustaining like Wilson? So I don't know where that lands, but that was something that came up for me. And then the other thing, and I think the bias, you talk about people who voluntarily answer surveys. I think maybe we see some of that bias in the results of the comments on the cannabis, perhaps. And so I would like to see maybe some questions about cannabis regulation in the survey where you're going to get a better cross-section of response.
We have definitely asked that in other communities since the legislature finished their work last year.
Quote unquote, finish.
Yeah, I'll add that too, yeah.
We'll try to avoid the political comments and just focus on.
And if I think maybe Kimberly and then Paula, but if I can just jump in real quick. Just first on Rebecca's couple comments. Later this year, let me back up. So during our framing of the study session work plan for this year, what we framed up later this year is during the utility conversation regarding the budget is taking a look at franchise fees as it relates to trail funding. let's see, Will, so this was before my time, so 2016 or 19, whatever the franchise fees, 18, somewhere the franchise fees came into play.
Yeah.
Those fees have not been adjusted, and staff is not suggesting we increase them, but at least having a conversation on really the history of how much we've collected over the years. What we're seeing is, again, from a staff perspective, that list that's in your CIP of $85 million worth of projects, that used to be $60 million, and just with inflation and construction costs the last few years, we're seeing that list and the cost to construct out that list grow to, again, that $85 million plus. So I think, is there a question, I think Rebecca and I think I've had this conversation with a few of you, is should we tease out a question on, is there an appetite of some level for increasing revenue sources, mainly the franchise fees, to accelerate funding or something to that effect? Because we do have at least one question in the survey that Peter can allude to that deals with a tax question, and so we could look to expand that if you're interested, council, on trails and appetite for increased funding of trails to accelerate again those. That's one of the things we hear about a lot, I think, at the city. Staff does, I think you do, council, just trails, sidewalks, and people wanting more of them and wanting them quicker. That was one thing, and then one thing about the other thing I was going to mention with Rebecca's comment on cannabis. Certainly we can ask that question. I think it's just a matter of timing, because tonight we have a conversation about cannabis, and then there'll be a question on, I think timing-wise, as you as a council, are you ready to move forward with implementing an ordinance, or if we ask some more survey questions around cannabis, that will delay the implementation of an ordinance till three or so months. Couple months yet away from that. So just some timing wise to think about.
If I could,
Right.
yeah, oh, I'm sorry. If
Go
I,
ahead, Mr. Levin, go
thank
ahead.
you. If I do, in last year's survey, we asked more generic, and we asked, do you support the continued investment of both property taxes and other funding sources to preserve and or expand various community assets? We talked about the CIP. We had 4% that said no, 65% talk about preservation, and 19% talked about expansion. So you kind of have the mandate for the use of the funds for projects. What we really don't have is specificity on what they're willing to use those funds for. So I might suggest working with staff on developing, would you support the use of CIP funding for expansion of trails? Or part of the other, if the list has grown to 85 million, and get some specific reactions to potential projects, might be a way to kind of drill down deeper. Because you have the mandate to do it. You just don't know what the mandate's for specificity of the projects.
Very good.
And then I think Kimberly, and then was there some?
Kimberly? Yeah, I can't see Kimberly, but Kimberly, go ahead.
Okay.
There we are.
So it's kind of been covered, but so at the, it's just at the Ellers financial things and the municipal finance class, they talked about the city budgeting process, and one of their recommendations was conducting a biennial community survey around the budgeting process. Which I was like, well, we have an annual survey. We can ask some questions there. And so I had, and knowing that we had the one question, and I think in the past there's been a question about, would you support increase in the tax levy to maintain services?
Correct.
So we had the conversation about what potential budget questions that could be asked, and the trails was one of them. And was there something else you suggested? It was,
We did, but yeah.
I think there was something else, but anyway, so that's, I know there's a, like, we only want a certain number, and so I don't know if there's
As small as it's going to go.
if there's an appetite among the council to have more budget questions or not, but that's just a consideration.
Thank you. Anything, was there someone else too?
I had
Deb
one,
and then Paula, Brad.
Mayor.
Okay, yep.
I don't know, maybe it's too early, but we keep on kind of talking a little bit about sales tax. It comes up periodically. And I don't know if it's too early because we can't do anything about it for a while, one way or another. And, you know, I don't know what's going to happen at the state legislature. But should the opportunity arise, would we want to know sort of how the wind blows on that?
I think that's a valid question.
Yes, that question.
Paula?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, since as one of the newbies, thank you, Mayor, I don't know what I don't know yet.
So you're generally, yeah.
So I guess one thing though is incorporating maybe as we go forward some of these sustainability, measures that we're thinking about taking, communications or whatever, just anything that comes out of this planning process. If we want to incorporate anything from that, not to try to add too much to that, but is there anything that we need to get back from the community? And I don't have specifics yet because we don't have the specifics of the plan yet. But since we're looking at a 3-month lead time before it looks like the survey is going to go out, we have some time to maybe think about if we want to put something about that in. And then I guess the only other thing that I have possibly in the same context of that would be going back to the bugaboo of garbage collection. And consolidated.
There's a
And
collective
then
sigh.
There's a groan.
That's a bad idea.
We don't want to know.
And thirdly, I would be interested, because you just mentioned, some things that other communities are doing. It doesn't have to be right here, but again, if other people have great ideas of things they're asking in their communities that are hitting you, that, aren't already in our survey that maybe we should consider, again, as somebody who doesn't know yet what I don't know, I'd love to hear that.
Sure. I think at a macro level, big picture, you kind of check all the boxes. Because you do this annually, you're able to update with current trends. I mean, going back through the years in the city, 30 years of surveys every year, everything from outdoor recreational fires to organized garbage collection to we've run the gamut of kind of like the issue du jour. Now the issue du jour this year is going to be cannabis in city surveys and local sales tax. I mean, those are the two big ones. You folks were on the cutting edge of the diversity, equity, inclusion questions and expanding that out to what it is. And actually, a lot of cities, I just say, this is kind of the best practices set of questions, and you can expand from that or decrease from that. I think, the one issue, and we get at it with your public safety, but we're seeing it pretty consistently continue to grow. And that's the concern. It's not traffic speeding. It's not law enforcement. It's now reckless and dangerous driving. It is, and this is, as a public safety concern, when we ask the question, pretty much that leads the list. And even if we're in a first-ring suburb with higher crime rates in comparison, I mean, it expands across all. It's not the speeding. It's weaving in and out on 169 or what have you as a major concern. So that's, you really do, for looking at 23, what we did in 23, the direction of 24, I expected to come in tonight and hear about cannabis and potential sales tax. That's kind of a given. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay, just when you mentioned, thank you, Mayor. Sorry, Mayor. May I speak,
No
Mayor?
problem, you're good. No problem.
Just your comment on traffic calming, and I know we have a question on that. That is something that I've heard from, pedestrian safety / because of car speeding. That's something I'm hearing a lot, so I'm glad that we have that in our survey anyway. So, thank you.
And then-
Anyone else? Or I've got one that's related to the question that Deb raised. Kizzy, do you have something?
No.
Okay. Okay, Deb raised the question, about local option sales tax. And to me, you know, cities are always looking for new ways to raise revenue. And to me, that's the relevant question is, and I don't know if it's a good survey question or not, but is there a preference for how cities should raise money for things that the residents of the city value and want? So that brings up local option sales tax, that brings up franchise fees, that brings up other sources of revenue, and it brings up property taxes. And, you know, I don't know if there's space in there for a question that, you know, if the local government is going to reach into your pocket, you have a preference for how. One of the
I wouldn't word it that way.
You know, one of the questions that we've heard about is when the city raises a fee that everybody pays and doesn't have a choice, is that a fee or a tax? And I think that argument resonates. So if we impose franchise fees and call them franchise fees, but they're charged directly to our residents, well, that's not a fee, that's a tax. And so, you know, I get into this issue of intellectual honesty. And so I'm wondering if there's a question there that talks about preferences for how people would like the city to raise the money it needs for things that its residents value. I don't know if there's a valid question there or not.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. We've asked it, actually we started tracking it now with the rise of the local option sales tax. And in the community surveys we just shared with the city managers a couple weeks ago, we've been tracking that question over the last 3 surveys on the preference of how to, if you're going to have an increase in revenue, what's the overall preference. So I'm more than happy, I'll put that in the survey draft for you folks to take a look at. It's interesting, there was a shift just in 6 months. 6 months ago, people said local sales tax. Then we had a whole bunch of local sales tax elections in November, and now we're down to 37% saying sales tax. So it's one of those things. I mean, what's now? If you ask, do you want a property tax? No, they really didn't want that in November either. I mean,
Right.
property tax increases were
Right.
not met favorably either. But overall preference question, absolutely, I can include that in.
All right, and I'm not saying it will make the cut, but, you know, that's, I mean, you know, it's almost like, which of these do you dislike the least question?
Right. Yes. Exactly.
And then Brad?
Council, anything else for Bill, Mr. Leatherman, or Mike, you have a comment?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just gonna lean on Miranda or Peter just to talk about timing, because timing's everything with this, because we need to pull together questions, and maybe Miranda, if you wanna just talk about timing.
Yeah, you have the timeline, I think. Or,
I do, and Sarissa's going to have to help me if I'm incorrect here. So we're going to wrap up the survey here by the end of February. All the directors are also asked to give comments back, which is where Kelly has Park Board, Julie has Sustainability, and they feed in those questions there too. And then I think we owe those to Sarissa next week. And then by the end of the month, we usually have the survey wrapped up, and then it goes out usually in March-ish sometime. And then I believe Peter will be coming back to, I think, this setting again to do the summary in May. Am I right, Sarissa?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a tentative start of the survey being conducted on February 26th. So even before March a little bit.
So yes,
That's
about
leap
3
year.
months before results, but
Yeah.
we're wrapping up
Leap year,
here in the
really.
next,
Got
the
it.
next few weeks with
All
the
right.
survey questions.
Got it.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And somebody did, I was just at the City of Carver with their work session starting their city survey before I came here. And the mayor asked a really good question. Snow plowing. Last time we were assessed for in 2020, that wasn't a great year. How do you get this assessment? I said, actually, you're going to have the benefit. It's going to be like when we do a city survey in September. People are basing it on recall of the past. And of course, you know, watch now, we'll have 24 inches of snow before we get the survey started, so they will have an experience. But that's why it's always important with the timing, absolutely.
Yeah, we prefer that you didn't make that 24 inches of snow prediction.
God, please no. No.
I think I've got 8:05. Is there anything else that anyone wants to ask? Otherwise, Peter, we thank you very much for being here. Did I miss anyone?
I think you're good,
No,
Brad.
Cindy? All right, well, does everyone want to take a 5-minute break? We'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll get back to it if that works for everybody. Julie, you're on.
All right, thank you. Oh wait, are we on? Okay. So we had a discussion in August of last year at the city council meeting. We had an intro of ordinance to talk about cannabis use on public spaces. And a group of us, if you can share the PowerPoint, that would help my talking, because I can't talk without a PowerPoint for some reason.
Come on, Julie, you can do it.
I usually can do it.
Yeah, you can do it.
I can do it. I do want to say there's a group of us at the city have been working on it. Kareen kind of started this whole thing and drafted the ordinance, and then we started meeting with police, and then we had Kelly come in and talk about park use and that sort of thing. So we've had kind of a group of us talking about what may be a good kind of next step on the public use issue. So the two questions I'm going to ask you at the end is, are you supportive of the revised ordinance that we've included in your packet? And then do you have any other information that you would like? And if you can sit on the thing, I can advance. There we go. Thank you. So I talked about all that. Oh, when you introduced it, you talked about public engagement, so you wanted to do some public engagement. So we've done a number of those. We'll talk about the results of that. And I think underneath the mayor's picture there's a notation about what the city can and cannot regulate. That was also in your packet if you need to remind yourself of that. So in our public outreach, we did contact all 27 licensed retailers for tobacco in the city. Unfortunately, we only got one back. That's unusual. Usually tobacco, they love to talk to the city, so I'm not sure why. It could have been the length of the survey. Maybe it was just too much. But we did get one response to the survey, and their results are in the packet. We also had 5 events at various locations. There was, Kareen, you were attending the joint city council and the park board meeting. You also went to the farmers market in Williston, the Marsh, citywide open house. So some of these were out for a while. Some of these were just a day event. So depends on which event we were looking at. On that, they use dots to indicate the location categories. Almost 700 people said don't allow any cannabis use in any form in the locations that we define. 438 dots said that they would like to prohibit smoking and vaping, but allow edibles to happen in those same areas. And then 215 dots supported no restrictions, so don't regulate it at all on public spaces. The online survey, here we got a lot more responses, 930 responses. I think that wins, does that win the whole Minnetonka Matters? I think it's more than the Marsh might still be the lead survey on the.
I was reminding you of that, yes, the Marsh.
It is the Marsh, sorry. I think we had 1,100, 1,300, something like that. I always like to say that so that you have a clue how much participation we have. 88% of those respondents indicated they lived in Minnetonka. We always ask that question so we know, we don't make them register on some of these surveys, so we want to know if they live here. So I think for the most part people answer pretty honestly. It was fairly diverse in terms of the age, although a little bit higher on the 65 plus category, I would say. Men to women, a little heavier on the female side. And 85% of the respondents identified it as white. 96 to 89% of the respondents did not support smoking or vaping cannabis on public property. But then if you ask them, this is an interesting sidebar, if you ask those same people, would they regulate public spaces that are privately owned? A good example of that would be Bennett Park. That's privately owned. That's not owned by the city of Minnetonka. So privately owned, but it's a public space. Now there's some other regulations that hit parks, so maybe that wasn't a great example, but the decline in number of supporting went to 40% in that case. There definitely was concern about secondhand smoke and access to minors. There was just a litany of written comments that we included in your packet. Corinne did some research on, she had done some in August, but you updated it as, this would have been as of last week. So there were 15 cities. She coded them in red, green, and blue, or red, green, and yellow, so you could kind of see what types of regulations each city had. 4 had no regulations at all. They're kind of in our spot right now. I think some people are just, what should we do? When should we do it? That sort of thing. 6 had regulation for more locations than we are considering in this ordinance. And then 5, there's a variety of regulations. So we just tried to summarize it for you. Also included in your packet, there were other city codes that address smoking and tobacco. And I think this is a kind of a head scratcher that our committee dealt with early on when you said, I mean, one of the first things we talked about, I think, is just saying, hey, just make it the same law as tobacco, right? How hard is that? Well, the problem is, just think about this campus. You're having an event at the dining room or the big space. You're having a wedding, let's say. You got lots of guests, and then you wouldn't allow somebody to exit the facility and have tobacco on campus. So that's a little tougher if you want to make them the same. The way this ordinance worked, it would just say no cannabis on campus. So there would not be a smoking or vaping of cannabis on campus. You'd still smoke tobacco or use tobacco, chewing tobacco, that sort of thing. So I think it sounds easy, but it is complicated when you think about the kinds of facilities the city regulates. I don't know, Scott, if you want to talk about public safety considerations, things that we've been seeing in terms of complaints, that sort of thing.
I can cover that. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you.
Chief?
Good evening, Mayor. So the possession of cannabis became lawful on August 1. So we went back since August 1st of last year. We had probably, I don't know, maybe 24 complaints. Of that, 3 were involving our property. One was at Ice Arena B, one was at the Grays Bay Marina, and the third one was at Shady Oak Beach at the basketball courts. The rest of them are going to be more of your multifamily, get complaints about, smoking in apartment buildings, things like that. So really 3 complaints that we have so far.
Okay. So not huge. Now we do get complaints about the Indoor Clean Air Act in general, and those are handled either by the police, depending on the time of day, or it's handled by community development in the public health area. Indoor Clean Air Act is different than some of the regulations we're talking about. For instance, in an apartment building, you cannot smoke in public spaces that are held in common. Depending on the apartment building owner, they may or may not regulate use of any kind of smoking in your unit itself. So it just depends on which building owner. Now, Corinne, you reminded me of there's a slight law change coming in 2025 that talks about apartments specifically. Do you want to just rehash that for me?
It's referenced in the staff report or the supplemental background report. I'd have it up, but my computer died. My recollection is that as of March 2025, it makes it illegal to smoke in multi-residential units.
Yeah. So for now, unless they have a special citation in the lease with that, with the renter, it would be allowed in their unit, but not in the public spaces. So if that makes any sense. But that's the Indoor Clean Air Act, and those regulations still apply. So anywhere you can't smoke today is the same places you can't smoke cannabis. So just to remind you about that. And then there's a bunch of other statutes that there was a nice chart included in your packet about other statutes that controlling the use of cannabis. So what I'm telling you, there's so many moving parts. And again, try not to think about all of those moving parts, except for now we're trying to just talk about public space and the city use. So in the proposed ordinance, we had a version for you in August. We've changed it slightly in this new rendition. So basically it prohibits any use, eating or smoking within 50 feet of city-maintained outdoor facilities which mirror the park regulations. But if you kind of transpose that into later, we say no smoking of cannabis on city park property or on city park trails within parks. So just keep that in mind as we read through this. The amphitheater, we just made a note here, now falls within the no smoking, but eating would be allowed, meaning eating edibles. City properties fall within the no smoking, but eating allowed. The second part here is it prohibits vaping or smoking, again, on any city park property, including trails located within the park property. Okay? The trail along 101, that wouldn't be included. That's not in a park. The trail, I'm thinking of Rebecca who lives on the Plymouth Road Trail. That's not within a park. So that would not be prohibited use on that trail. If you're in Big Willow, or in this case I have Glen Lake, if you're anywhere in the Glen Lake park system, you would not be allowed to smoke cannabis. Let's see, also it says on any part of a property upon which city-operated building is located. So a good example is this campus, right? You have a city building. Another one would be Williston, that's a city building. Marsh would be a city building. Williston's a good example where you don't have a park within it. So here we have a park attached to the City Hall campus. Williston would be where we don't have a park designated in that area. We actually removed transit and bus stops because you did some homework, Scott, on the transit facilities.
Yes, so transit already has ordinances and regulations against the use on any of their trains, buses, including their stations, their platforms.
Okay, so that was already covered. I don't think we knew that right away. So when we did our last version of it, we had included those. And then, except as limited above, this use would be allowed on any other public or private properties, including city streets and trails outside of park properties, just to, once again, try to make it clearer. So the questions again are, is the city council, supportive of the revised ordinance, or do you have more questions or things you need before we bring this back? The intention is to bring this back for a full adoption. And Corrine, I forgot when we decided to schedule the next meeting. I'm gonna have to look at my cheat sheet, so I'll get back to you on what month we're gonna bring it back. But so, Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, let's comments from council members on the questions posed in terms of the revised ordinance and any other points that you would think are relevant to this conversation.
This might.
Kizzy?
I just have a comment. I do have a concern with youth, even though we can't control youth, but I'm really worried about youth smoking in parks, vaping. Vaping has been a really big thing for youth. I mean, hell, I caught my daughter this year with vaping, so it's been a big thing. And I don't even really, sometimes I don't even think kids really understand, like, even though this is cannabis, but I don't even really think kids really understand, like, what vaping is. And just my own personal experience. But I'm really concerned about youth getting criminalized for smoking, vaping in parks, in public facilities. I don't think they should be allowed, and no one should be allowed to vape in public, because vaping is smoking to me. So, like it's smoking, like cigarettes, weed, whatever you want to do is smoking. It's all the same. So I just think, I'm just concerned about, like, how would this be for the youth? Because so many youth are vaping. I've never seen nothing like it, and it's just, it's a lot, and so I'm just really concerned about it. It feels like the new criminal justice system, like it's going to be for youth. So that's my biggest deal right there. I don't know how we address that. How do we deal with that? Because I can just see kids at parks vaping, and so that's my biggest concern.
Well,
Thank you, Kizzy. Patsy, go ahead.
Well, Corinne, you were going to answer Kizzy.
If you're talking about minors,
Yeah.
it's illegal for them to, that's not within the city's control. The
Right.
legislature has made that a crime for minors to possess
Under 21.
cannabis product. So,
Under 21.
I know it's
so that then becomes more of an enforcement issue. It's not a, what do we do with our ordinance, because, and state law also makes it illegal for anyone, even an adult who can smoke cannabis. They can't smoke it any place where it could be inhaled by a minor.
Right.
So, but those are state law issues.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think Patsy has
I was going to ask Scott, when you covered the transit, the bus transit, did they include edibles for those too?
Ooh, good question. I don't know that answer. I believe it just fell under where they're
I
smoking
didn't-
tobacco, but I don't know about edibles.
Smoking.
I think it was just
Just
smoking.
smoking. And I mean, this is a stupid question, but like, how do we even
Yeah.
enforce edibles at all? I mean, is that just like a, sort of just like a formality? Saying that we can't do, that we're not allowing
I
edibles in parks?
suppose it's kind of like, I'm thinking about the different forms tobacco comes in, right? So you
Yeah.
say no tobacco use on city property. So that does include things like chewing tobacco or, right? Or smoking or.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like that. It's kind of just another version of it.
sure.
And you kind of have to just ask yourself, I think, do you just want to regulate it in totality, or do you want to allow some use?
Right.
I mean, catching somebody
Yeah,
consuming
to your
edibles.
point, I think
eh.
identifying that as a edible cannabis is very difficult.
Right.
I would say it's one of those things where you have a rule, but to enforce it is not going to happen.
Right.
It's
Okay.
just easier for the user maybe to understand.
Yeah, you're just asking for compliance, but yet to enforce it, I think it would be nearly impossible
Okay.
to enforce that.
Yeah, I do too.
I think
Other comments?
I have the same concern about the edibles. I mean, I think it's kind of superfluous to have that in there, but it's not a hill I'm going to die on. I have really shared the concerns that Kizzy has. And I used the analogy today with Mike. I mean, I get this, and I think it made my feelings known that I don't think this is an urgent issue, but I get that it's a priority for other people. But my concern is, the 70-year-old guy smoking a cigar in the park is not going to get the cops called on him in the way that the 22-year-old black kid's going to get the cops called on him smoking marijuana in the park. And so from a policy perspective or an enforcement perspective, we have to keep that bias in mind, because there is a criminalization of this that is really troubling to me. All that being said, I don't want the guy smoking the cigar, and frankly, I don't want the marijuana smoke in the park either when I'm out trying to get fresh air and running or whatever. But it is really in the nagging me in the back of my mind how we deal with folks who are smoking anything.
And then, Paula, let's see, I want to make sure, yeah, Paula, you're next. I'm getting some traffic direction here from afar, so. And then- Go ahead, Paula.
All right, I actually just have a comment/question. This is something that came up, for me during the recent campaign, and one person pointed out that if we are substantially different in terms of our regulation, our ordinances from our surrounding communities, what could the consequences be, and I asked that for our chief and others, and the concern was from this particular resident that would mean that you would have people from other surrounding cities coming to use here, and is that a concern? Because again, I'm going to defer to the
I would say consistency across borders is easier for the person to know what the rules are in each and every city. However, I don't think that if we had something that was drastically different, we would become now the magnet for whatever. I don't think that would affect us at all. Like I said, we've had 3 calls to public space. Anything we decide today, I really don't think, and in fact, with marijuana possession in our county has, for the last 4 or 5 years, has really diminished. So I don't expect a big impact regardless of the decision made on this.
Thank you.
And then Deb?
So I had a question and then a couple of comments. My question is, we were talking about multifamily in the new regulation, and there are common spaces. I'm trying to understand what the reference there was in relation to what we're considering here, which is public spaces. So I just want to make sure I'm thinking about that correctly.
Right, so I think the point is when you're thinking about all regulation regarding smoking, vaping, cannabis, whatever, that you don't forget there's still the Clean Indoor Air Act that applies to a lot of buildings that maybe you think, well, no, they're in control of themselves. They're not. I mean, there's still regulation. I mean, frankly, sometimes, and this can happen anywhere, I suppose, businesses too, this happens, where I can think of a situation where United Health Group doesn't allow any smoking on their campus anywhere, right? So where do they go? They go out to the trail in Opus to walk and smoke and do whatever. So I think that's part of the consideration, that if there are some more stringent inside the property regulation, that it could spill over into city property. I mean, that's kind of the thought process I had with including the Indoor Clean Air Act and other examples like that.
So my comments are, I think the whole purpose of the legislation, and when I made my comment about not finishing, it's because we're sitting here grappling with things that possibly should have been decided elsewhere, maybe not. But the whole point was to decriminalize and to make sure that especially young people and people of color, young people of color specifically, or particularly, don't end up getting entangled for minor offenses with marijuana, which so many Americans use. That said, there is the air quality issues and the secondary secondhand smoke issue that, you know, is the same no matter what people are smoking. And so I just want to make sure, one of the things that I think about when I think about these multifamily housing regulations is that for good and for not so good, it disproportionately affects lower income people, which sometimes also means people of color, which means in some ways we are protecting people because they're not breathing secondhand smoke, but also people that live in single family homes have the privilege of smoking whatever they want when they want to, and people that live in a rental unit don't have that ability. So we are, you know, somebody's rights are going to be limited one way or another. So those are that's my thought on that. In terms, I think it's very, I don't like coming up with unenforceable rules. So when we're talking about edibles, why bother? I mean, honestly, it just makes a rule that we can't enforce, which is a terrible kind of rule. So I kind of was looking at the Plymouth ordinance, which really is about smoking on property owned, leased, or controlled by the city. So I that kind of makes sense. That seems like something that makes some amount of sense to me.
No smoking on city property.
Smoking.
Anything.
Well, I don't like.
Because I think that's how theirs reads.
It says no smoking of cannabis. That's what that says, no smoking of cannabis.
Oh, sorry, I was reading Woodbury.
On
Sorry.
property owned, leased, or
Woodbury
controlled.
says no smoking, sorry. Prohibit smoking of cannabis on property owned, leased, or controlled by the government.
I mean, I kind of feel like I want to make it more, almost more like what we do with alcohol. So however we treat alcohol. The only difference is if you drink alcohol, there's no secondhand alcoholic effect the way there might be with breathing smoke. So, you know, I'd like to have it be more like how we treat alcohol and not necessarily even how we treat smoking, but that one makes sense to me since we're just talking about.
Again, just so that everybody understands, Plymouth says prohibit smoking of cannabis on property owned, leased, or controlled by a governmental unit. And
I think we
Corinne,
could say this
Yes.
governmental unit.
When they say a governmental unit, they're talking about any.
That includes watershed
Station.
district property, yes.
So if you were down, if you were on 101, it's a county road, it's under county jurisdiction, that's a governmental unit. They would prohibit cannabis use on that.
I would say the governmental unit,
I don't
meaning
think,
the
I don't
city.
think
it
it's
doesn't mean that.
intended for that. It's talking about property that is owned in fee or leased for, or controlled by. I wouldn't push it that far to include roadways. I
Okay.
would
We
think
have
that
other laws
it's,
for that.
I think it's primarily buildings and park property.
And I
This
would
doesn't
say
that, so I
this-
think that's the unclear.
this
that's the
city,
unclarity.
not a governmental unit, but this governmental
Okay,
unit.
got it.
Are there other comments? If there aren't, I've got a couple of things that I'd like to toss out there. One was, I read an article in the New York Times about cannabis and some of the challenges associated with different legislation. But the thing that this article pointed out when it came to edibles, is that edibles are much more susceptible. And I've asked Mike, I'm gonna get a copy of this so that Mike can share it with the council. But edibles are much more susceptible to marijuana poisoning or cannabis poisoning and overdoses. And the reason for that is, according to this article, is that when you smoke marijuana, you get, it gets into your bloodstream almost immediately, and the impact on getting high or whatever is almost immediate. Whereas when you consume it as an edible, it doesn't happen so fast. And so people who may smoke from time to time say, gee, I'm not getting high, I need more. And they keep eating it, and then they do create a problem. They do create a toxicity problem. This article was pointing out that the dangers of edibles are more significant than vaping or smoking because it takes so long to get into the bloodstream, and it's also affected by, not unlike drinking alcohol. Do you have a full stomach, or are you drinking on an empty stomach? Are you consuming edibles on a full stomach or an empty stomach? But the dangers are real. And so I'm not, I'm a prude here, I will admit that. I really support the decriminalization of marijuana because I think the marijuana laws have been abused, and to Deb's point, I don't want to create another scenario where they can be similarly abused. I mean, that's what we're trying to get away from. So I want them to be, I want us to be able to apply them equally. And I also agree that I like to say that rules and laws that are not enforced are suggestions. And so to have a law that makes something illegal with no hope of enforcement is somewhat discomforting. But I'm also concerned by the reality of that if we don't make something illegal, whether it's gonna be enforced or not, we're kind of saying, well, gee, it's okay. And my problem with marijuana and cannabis is that it's an intoxicant, just like alcohol. And so the control should be treated as an intoxicant like alcohol. And there's plenty of other bad things in the world that are addictive and not good for you and things like that. But intoxicant puts other people at risk. There may not be secondhand smoke with an edible, but there is, if you're intoxicated, there are a lot of undesirable things that could happen to other people due to your behavior. So, as I look at this, I kind of like the more restrictive. I'm a fan of the red light approach rather than the yellow or green light approach. I like the simplicity of the Hopkins ordinance. And they're in a neighboring city. That's where my bias would be.
So,
anyone else?
What are our rules about alcohol in parks?
Not allowed, I don't believe, unless it's sold.
With a
by-
permit.
by
You can have a
permit.
permit.
By
You can
permit.
have a permit, yep.
Okay.
To have that right, Kelly? Thank you. Where are we headed here?
So,
Can we go back to
circle?
I want to clarify, so Mayor, you're suggesting that any public place, so even a privately owned public place?
Yeah, a bar, yeah. Yep.
It's already not allowed there.
Yeah, clean or indoor.
So
Can we-
that's a little different. Just let me read that for everybody.
But I think that would make it so the bars couldn't sell, like Unmapped couldn't sell a THC beverage.
Well, no. So just to clarify, what the state allowed us to regulate is the use of cannabis products in public places, outdoor public places. Indoor places are already regulated by the state, by the Indoor Clean Air Act. So we're only talking about public use in public outdoor spaces, which can include private properties that are generally open to the public. Bennett Park would be one example. Outdoor areas of bars would be an example. They are not controlled. The outdoor eating spaces are not controlled. But then the legislature also has another, if the property owner says it's okay, it's okay. We can't ban it if the property owner says it's okay.
Oh, I see.
But if
Right.
our ordinance prohibits it and the private property owner would call and say, somebody's smoking on my patio, I told them they can't do it, I want you police to come and stop it. That's where we would be involved, if we regulated privately owned property.
And that applies to edibles as well, because the Clean Air Act isn't going to cover edibles,
Yeah.
right?
True.
Right.
Or the
Yeah,
beverage
you would have
at
to say
Unmapped
whether or not you
whatever.
wanted to control edibles.
Right.
But we can't control retail sales. We could not tell Unmapped, you can't sell it. That's all, the state handles all of the retail sales stuff.
Yeah, stay away from the selling, it's the consumption we're talking
But
about.
Consumption.
wouldn't a person gets it, right, and they sit on the patio, is there, under the Hopkins regulation, isn't there, that's where the confusion comes in, right? No
They would
public.
not be able to in the Hopkins case.
Yeah.
You would not be able to
So-
sit on a patio and smoke
No,
cannabis.
drink the.
Yes, you
drink the
could,
drink.
if they bought it. If they go to Pub 819 and Pub 819 sells them a THC product and they say, use our patio, and they go and use the patio,
Yeah.
they're fine. Because the
Okay.
property owner has not said, you can't have this stuff.
Okay.
I think the private property, regulating private property just in general, there was a lot less support from the residents who did reply to the survey. And that's taking it, I would suggest that the council focus on the publicly owned properties and the public spaces and figure out where you want to be on those spaces. If I was hearing uniform agreement by the council that we got to stop this stuff, we don't want it, let's not allow it any place in the city, then we could talk about private spaces, but you're not even there yet. You got to figure out the public part. So that's what I would suggest
So
you
maybe-
focus on.
Can we just ask a series of questions, Mayor? That way it might hone in.
Well, and Corinne, I'll just comment, because I'm not trying to throw a fly in the ointment, although I probably have. So I would say this, my view is that the cannabis laws in the state of Minnesota are really quite unsettled. And chances are, whatever we pass, is going to get another look at some point in the future. I don't know that, but I suggest it's highly likely. So for that reason, I would support the alternative ordinance that you put before us, recognizing that it's probably not going to be a forever ordinance. But it's a good start and it's a good move forward, and I think we probably could get to agreement on that point. Let's do that, and then let's see what the state tells us as we kind of grow into this challenging issue. That would be my those are my pipeline thoughts. I don't know if anyone would concur with that or agree with that.
I'm fine with that. I think we need to move on from this because it's such a small thing that is going to change. I agree with the mayor.
Yeah. Yep.
Any other comments? Does anybody disagree with that notion? Let's move this ordinance forward, the revised ordinance forward, and then it will live to talk another day on this topic.
Yeah, and I think one change I would make is we'd just call it use of cannabis, Corinne, instead of saying smoking, or I can't remember what the actual ordinance says now, but use of cannabis, it would just cover any cannabis product, right? For all public spaces that we describe in the ordinance, right? Just to make it simple.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Simplicity sounds good.
Okay.
Council, how do you feel about that recommendation
Yes,
from
good.
Julie? All right.
Okay.
Is that giving
We
you
won't
what you
make
need,
any other,
Julie?
yeah, we won't make any other changes then. We'll just bring it almost in its current form.
Okay.
And making edibles and smoking prohibited.
Just call it
All of it.
cannabis use.
Cannabis is prohibited.
Cannabis
Yeah.
use. Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
Well, that was full circle. Thank you.
All right.
Well, I would just add, Mayor, I know there's just consternation. I think all cities are facing this consternation. I mean, I talk to my colleagues in other cities, all cities and other councils, other staff members are all trying to figure this out. My sense is what you said, Brad, and that is we're probably going to be back at this again. If we bring this ordinance forward before the session ends. Session ends kind of mid part of May. Someone's probably got an exact date other than me, but kind of May is when that's going to end, unless there's a special session.
Right.
So if you're looking for timing-wise, we could bring this forward. I think Karina and Julie have a plan to bring this forward in the next couple meetings. So we'll plan to bring it forward with basically no cannabis, and then we'll see what happens at the legislature, and perhaps again we're going to be back at it and making some tweaks. And then Deb has her hand up.
Yep, Deb.
So Paula and I are looking at the packet, and the proposed February 5th version allows edibles. So we're not doing the proposed.
Yeah, I said
Julie-
minus the
Julie
edibles.
modified.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
So we just said cannabis use in general, and that way we're not picking apart what
We're not
kind.
distinguishing
because-
between the form you're consuming it. We're just, what
Yeah.
we're hearing council say based on the mayor's suggestion is that we'd be prohibiting all cannabis in every form. So that's slightly different than what's listed in the packet, Deb. And so that's what we would be bringing back.
Yeah.
Any
Is that-
concerns
I just
from
wanted to make
council
sure I
on
knew
this
what we
item?
were voting on. Yep.
All right, well, we're not voting. We're agreeing.
What you
We're
will be
agreeing.
voting on.
We will-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll bring
Right.
it back in a couple of meetings unless there was consensus to wait. I don't know.
Unless there's consensus to wait,
Yeah.
and unless there's, timing-wise, again, there's nothing
over with.
rushing you. It's just a matter of, it's public policy for the city in terms of when you want this to go into effect. As we stated, this has been cannabis consumption in Minnesota has been legal, as the chief mentioned, and has been mentioned here since last August. We've had 3 complaints on it. So you could go down one of 2 paths. We can do path A, which is bringing us forward in the next couple of meetings that we've just highlighted, or you can wait until the legislature goes through its session in May and see where we're at. There's pros and cons to both of those. You might have, it just depends on what kind of pressure you're feeling as elected officials in terms of timing. If there's pressure to do something sooner than later, or if there's less pressure to do something, we certainly can wait and see where the legislature goes. As noted on that list, there's other cities like us that are sitting and doing the same thing that we're doing.
I don't feel strongly about it one way or the other. I mean, it doesn't seem to be a pressing matter. I'm not getting emails about it. So I don't see a problem with waiting. I guess the advantage of passing something now is that we can, say to our residents, okay, we've done something, here it is, and I don't know that it'll be a huge thing to amend or pass a new resolution if the legislature changes everything. So
You
that
know-
was no help at all, but I'm sorry.
Well, no, but it's a good point. But I think the other point is that if we bring this forward for passage, for the people who care, we will hear from them. There will be a public hearing when this comes back. When this ordinance comes back, we will get a sense of perspective from our residents. I think Mike makes a fair point. I mean, if the legislature is going to be done in May, we'll have a more and better formed law, hopefully, knock on wood, than we have now. But I think people are expecting us to have a point of view, and moving this forward, moves us in that direction. If we get to that point and realize, it's such a mixed bag and we're creating more hassle and it's worth, we're not required to pass it at that time. But I think, my view is moving it forward makes more sense than just sitting on it and waiting. I mean, one of the sobering things in our packet tonight was where you had all of that green by the cities that haven't taken any action, which when you compare cities, it makes it look like, they don't care, or we don't care what happens on this topic. And I think we as a city do. So, a couple of thoughts to chew on.
How about if I just make a decision? April, we'll bring it back.
Very good. Thank you,
All right.
Julie.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
Thanks, Julie.
I just think sometimes just need to close it. Okay, thank you.
No, that's what we need to do.
All right,
Thank you.
perfect.
All right, so we've got like 5 minutes left. Mike, is that enough time to do this last item, this little bit of training?
We probably need 10.
1/2 hour.
We probably need a half hour. So it's up to you, Mayor and Council, if you want to adjourn this evening, or we've got about a half hour left for our last agenda item, looking ahead to the March study session. Just a reminder that we have 2025 director budget presentations. So we have 8 directors coming, usually 12 minutes per director. We're talking about charitable gaming or gambling next month as well. So we talk about pull tabs, and then public safety master plan implementation review. So we got 3 pretty heavy items with the director presentation. So it's up to you, Council, when you want to have this conversation. Either we can go tonight and quickly as possible, or push it off.
I vote tonight.
Me too.
Yeah.
Let's
Get it done.
Corinne,
All right.
we can
Well,
be
let's
fast.
see if we can do it. Let's see if we can do it in 20 minutes and be out of here at 9:15.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Just 1 second for the presentation. All right. So I'll kick it off, and then Corinne will start talking about 60-day law. But before we do, As you're aware, over the last month, you've had some heavy stuff to deal with as a council in terms of voting. We want to just make sure some of the basics of the law are understood, and then hopefully prepping you for what's coming at you in March, because you do have a full March of plans that, let's just say, there's not maybe agreement on with either the city or the applicant or the neighborhood or whatever it is. So I think that's kind of why we thought it was timely to do this. Now, I don't know how many people did the online thing. You can still do it, doesn't matter. You can do it later. It's not a big deal, but I think it took me about an hour-ish, something like that. So please let us know if you still need sign-on information for that. We can do that. So go for it, Corinne.
So everything about the first 2 slides here are about the 60-day law, and everything that's written here is already in your packet. So knowing that you can go back and read that anytime you want, the only thing I'm going to do is remind you that every land use application is subject to this law. If we do not act within the time limit, it is automatically approved. If an application comes in and it is fully complete, and that's when the clock starts ticking, and we have 15 days to determine that it's fully complete. So, but if an application came in and the staff person had left for a 2-week vacation and stuffed it in a desk in the days when we did things in paper, in 60 days that thing will be approved if it's never left the desk. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there was a right to a public hearing. The neighbor's rights don't matter. It is automatically approved. That's what the law says. So the staff is careful to track that timeline closely, and they will tell you when you're up against the limit. We have 60 days initially. We have the right unilaterally to extend that to a total of 120 days. So 1 additional extension for 60 days. And then after that, any further extension has to be with the consent of the property owner. The property owner does not have the right to extend everything forever either. They can request an extension, and we can say, no, we've had this here long enough, you need to move forward. And so that's just the general 60-day law. So we'll move to the next one. One of the key things about the law is not just that you have to make a decision in a timely fashion, you have to make findings. It only requires you to make findings when you're denying something, because this was adopted from a perspective of protecting developers and not holding them up. And so when they come in, if you're going to deny them, they have to know what the reasons were for the denial, and they have to be provided to them in a timely fashion. So when the staff is recommending approval of an item, if you want to vote against that, you need to state your reasons on the record for why you are voting against it. And that is a requirement of this law. And it will protect us if there's a subsequent lawsuit, if those findings are legally sufficient and they have factual basis in the record. So if the staff is recommending denial, it isn't as critical, the findings. You can just say, I am voting against this for the reasons that are in the staff report. And now you've just incorporated and stated on the record, those are your reasons. So you can make it simple when it can be simpler if the staff is recommending denial, but in any other situation, you need to make sure that you are stating your reasons on the record. And I strongly encourage you, if you haven't already seen the presentation and the training, it's important to review that, because he goes through the importance of making that record and what are the appropriate bases for denying something. You have to look to, for the conditional use permits and variances, you have to look to your own ordinances and the standards that you made and point out something where they didn't comply with it.
And Corinne, just because I always like to give examples, so if if there's a situation where we're recommending approval of something and you're gonna want to decide otherwise, totally fine. But if Mike understands that that's your perspective, he might just tell the staff, hey, there's some concerns about this. We might actually even start drafting something that models what Mike is hearing, because it would just help us get better positioned if that were the council's decision. But if we don't know any of that, or we don't have any clue, and again, your idea is not to make a decision right until you get into that room, but we can have some of that understanding before we enter. And so, but that's very helpful. I would say it happens most of the time. We kind of have a heads up about that, but occasionally we don't. And that's when it's harder, right? So it's harder to make up, not make up, but it's harder to establish findings on the fly. That's, and if a council member says, can you draft findings for us? We would do that in the opposite direction of the staff recommendation. We would do that. So, next slide.
And I would just say
Next
council's been
slide.
really good about articulating that when we do talk during our conversations. And again, staff is never seeking, and as I said to all of you, staff is never asking how you vote, right? You're going into those meetings still hearing information, but just articulating to me if you have concerns, or perhaps even if you think things are going well, it's just good to know that, so then staff can do some of the prep work that's being discussed here.
Mm-hmm.
So the 60-day law requires findings, and it specifically requires them when there's a denial. But even if the 60-day law didn't exist, the courts have, for decades, said, if we're reviewing a decision, we need you to tell us on what basis you made the decision, so that we can determine whether your decision was arbitrary. And so you need state reasons. The court would require that anyway. And that's why we have those detailed findings in the resolutions and ordinances.
So I think the example, I don't know if I have it. Yeah, there's some standards. So this is a resolution on the right-hand side, and on the bottom you can see it says standards. So there's a city code section. It says what the standard is. So just lift those out if that's what you want to do, because it's all there. It's just a matter of you deciding what one you think may not be met. And some of these are really subjective in terms of like, trying to think, help me with a subjective standard.
Well, one of the subjective standards, or one that we frequently see, is that the proposed use will not have any adverse impacts on the neighborhood.
Right.
And typically that's getting at things like traffic or noise, but that's a more subjective standard, because how adverse is adverse, and what could they propose that might adequately buffer that adverse impact.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the more flexible or subjective ones, but you have many just really specific criteria.
Like meeting
it
the
must
lighting.
be on a collector street.
Lighting ordinance.
Yes.
There's a certain standard in lighting ordinance, they either meet it or don't. It's not really one that you could make a case for in the opposite direction if you had facts otherwise. So
Right.
Anyway, let's see. This is, we've showed it to our newer council members. This is the staff review team. It's the development review team that looks at all of the applications. I know you know this because you kind of hear this as we talk. We'll say, the fire department weighed in and they said this, and, engineering said that. And so you'll see comments from all of these people. So when there's an actual resolution crafted, those conditions come directly from all of those people. The planner, or the person presenting the project, is only compiling all of that information. Now, they sometimes pretend we're engineers, right? Or we might pretend we're traffic, gurus or whatever. But I think it's only because we've been around it so many years, we know exactly kind of what somebody might say about this or that. But there's like 20, I think we're at 21 people at this point that sit on that committee. Now, that's not the only people that get notified of a development review. So then Mike has a whole nother list that gets what we call the project review list, and those are even more city employees. Maybe somebody's checking to make sure they pay taxes, they're not behind on utility bills. There's, you know, various people involved in that as well that don't sit on the team but get notified and then let us know as staff if there is a concern. And then the communication approach, I think sometimes people just assume we send it to 400 people, 400 feet from the parcel involved, and then that's it. That's all we do. That's not exactly how it works. So if you notice, sometimes there's a slide in your slide deck that says, are you okay with the notification area? That's why we do that, so that we make sure that we're saying to you, hey, this is what we think, but do you have other opinions about it? That's a really important step before we get too far in a planning process. So don't maybe gloss over those maps too much. I know it's sometimes it's hard to kind of look at it, but that's kind of our check-in with you to say, hey, are you good with this or are you not? Also, concept review is always used when there is potential for public disagreement or public input that might not be supportive. So if I see a project, planners are bringing it forward, maybe they don't see that there's conflict, but I might see it, I'll probably say to them, have you gone to a concept review or at least a neighborhood meeting? Again, none of that is required by ordinance, but it's something we do in addition to our required process. So those of you who've been around for a while, you know that, you know, inherently that's how it happens. You'll always have people say, we weren't notified for the meeting. I guarantee you I will find the postcard that was sent on the date it was sent. From the post office it was sent. But we have actually had some problems with delivery lately, so I shouldn't overstate that. But I would say the primary way is the web and the project pages, and that's how people find out. We have really good followers on those pages. We're in hundreds on almost every development application, so that says to me people are paying attention and using the resources we're putting out there. The project map that we do for all development within the city, so let's say you're looking at a house in Minnetonka and you just want to zoom in and see what's happening in your neighborhood, that's all very available to you. All right, I went on a bit about that, sorry. You moved your cursor for me.
Well, and again, I think you get a sense of why we wanted to just tease this part of it out is, especially just going back to our most recent application. Sometimes I think residents don't understand just the level of scrutiny that we put into an application. And with that development review team, Julie, can you give me a sense, or give us a sense, or give the council a sense on, like, just on one project, how often a development review committee will meet on a project? It's more, it's
On
once
one
for sure.
project?
Yeah, one project.
It can be 6 times before you see it. So that means that that's in the room. That doesn't count site visits, that doesn't count research they're doing on their own, or the writing that they do on their own. So, but 6 times in person can be on a fairly sizable project. And that could be with the developer too, and that sort of thing. So it doesn't happen overnight at all. I think we covered this part, except for the last bullet here. Do you want to talk, Corinne, about quasi-judicial and impartiality?
So in the presentation, the league training, it talked about the 3 different types of decisions, and quasi-judicial is the one where you're approving a plat, you're approving a conditional use permit, or I should say considering. You're looking at an application for a plat, a conditional use permit, or a variance. And the courts have talked about, because you are quasi-judicial, kind of like a judge, you also need to be impartial, like a judge. So many times developers will want to meet with council members in advance of, or residents may want to meet with council members. In court proceedings, judges only consider things that are made on the record. They don't consider facts that are made outside the record. So these meetings that you might have with property owners or property owners or neighbors or developers are all happening outside of the record, and the things that they are telling you are outside of the record. One of the things that's if the things that have been said at those meetings are influencing your decision, repeat them if they're not already in the staff report. So the staff report will lay out all the facts that are relevant, but if you've learned something from a site visit and it's impacting your decision, disclose that on the record. Because if it's not in the record, again, the judge always looks at, is the reason that you stated legally sufficient? Meaning, does it match up with the ordinance that you adopted that said these are what the standards are? Does it match up with the ordinance? If it does, it's legally sufficient. Are there facts in the record that support that decision? But if you learned something outside of the council proceeding and you don't get it in the record, there isn't going to be anything in the record to support your decision that, let's say it was a traffic issue and you saw something, but it's not reflected anywhere. You need to be sure that the things you learn outside are coming into the meeting. That's number one. Number two, you will hear the statement made, when you meet with property owners, developers, neighbors, outside council meetings, don't make your decision before you get to the council meeting. Judges hear all the facts, they go through the process, and they don't make their decision. So don't commit to someone, I'm going to vote this way, or I support this, or I don't support that. Wait, keep your mind open, and come to the meeting and make your decision after the entire record is in. There is one case where a council member, and it's not a precedential case, it doesn't have precedential effect, but it's the only one out there, and city attorneys look to it. The city council in Minneapolis, there was a council member who was leading the charge against a conditional use permit, and she had neighbors rallied up, and she made definite statements before it ever came to the city council about trying to stop the project. And the developer and the council denied the application. And when the developer challenged it, the Court of Appeals said that council member was not impartial and did not exercise the impartiality required for a quasi-judicial proceeding. And they said, we're sending it back to the city council, but that council member cannot participate in the discussion. And the council has to look at it and make a decision on the same record, but impartial, not affected by the bias of this one council member. So that's the reason why we always say do not commit in advance of the meeting. Wait until all of the record has been developed. And
One more
then-
thing, Corinne, before you go on in terms of meetings. So you do have a lot of developers who will call and they will say, I want to talk to you, I want to tell you all about my project, right? And so, I mean, from staff's opinion, we don't tell you whether to do something or not. I mean, that's up to you whether or not you want to meet with somebody. There are some pros and some cons that Mike and I are pretty aware of. On the pro side, you do get to kind of see a project kind of upfront and personal, and you can see who's behind it, you can see the developer. On the con side, it does kind of, sometimes you get a little bit wrapped in to their storyline or whatever it is that they're proposing, and that can kind of muddy the water in your head about, trying to remain impartial as you approach your council meeting, because maybe maybe they're a really friendly developer and they're just, so happy to see you on site and yay, and that kind of starts to affect your decision making. And not to say it would, but it does muddy the water. The other thing is, again, a lot of things get said at these interactions, and I'm putting this on the con side, and they might say, well, how do you feel about tree preservation? Okay, well, that's a pretty wide open question. But whatever you respond, that might say, you know, I'm very much in line with tree preservation, and it kind of might give an inkle to them that you might not feel like their project meets the tree preservation ordinance when you haven't really even made that decision. So I think there's some cons to doing that. The other con that it has is sometimes they'll say, well, staff is saying this, you know, and trying to tell you what staff said. Sometimes it's true. Maybe it's a little different than how we said it, or maybe the basic thing is true, but it's not the whole story. You know, I would say that's most often what happens. So then there's this kind of chess game. Is that the best way to say it? Like, oh, the staff member said this, and the developer said this, and the neighborhood said this, and then there's this kind of gamesmanship. I think that's what I would describe it as. So it's a lot easier for us as staff people if we know, you know, we've met with the developer, we know what we said to the developer. Now it gets into the public hearing, we know what's said at the public hearing, and then finally when they get to you for a decision is the important part, right? But remaining impartial. So I mean, there are positives and negatives about meeting with applicants. And I would say not just developers, I would say any applicant. There's developer in one circle, but there's a lot of different applicants that you may have, whether that be someone who owns a group home or someone who is just remodeling their home. They're considered an applicant as well. So I don't know, did I cover everything?
No, I did, yeah, thank you, Joanna. It's always hard to, I think, when, again, staff is not saying don't meet with the developer, but it can be tricky at times, especially where if staff, you know, oftentimes, I can't remember, well, Julie, let me ask it this way. So I can't remember a developer meeting the first time with staff saying, all right, our project's gonna meet all the ordinances.
I'm not sure we had one.
I don't think that's ever happened, and so oftentimes where I go with that is staff has to share the ordinances. And so in sharing the ordinances and the restrictions we have and limitations perhaps on the type of project or what they're trying to propose, they don't like to hear all of our ordinances. And so that's where, for staff, sometimes that gets dicey when they start reaching out to you and then they start pitting staff against you and well, staff said this and we don't like that. And so that's where I think we just caution you in terms of what you hear from a developer after they meet with staff, because again, sometimes that's not always the true narrative, the actual
or
narrative.
not the whole narrative.
The whole narrative.
All right, that's our speech on developers.
Well, thank you. Council, any comments or questions before we wrap it up?
Oh,
I know.
I think there was something else.
We're not done, Mayor.
Not
One
done yet,
second.
He's ready to go.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, well, pardon me.
All right, one more slide and then we really are done.
Sorry, I was trying to jump in.
That's all right, one more.
That's okay.
Okay.
So one of the things that you may hear is you can't rely upon the fact that the neighborhood doesn't like something is not a reason to deny a project. And that is true. The actual legal thing is that neighborhood opposition in itself is not a reason. So it's not, if what you said was, well, the neighborhood is against this and I'm going to vote no, you haven't stated a reason. But if the neighbors are coming in and they're saying, the traffic impacts of this thing are going to be this. I live on this street. This is what I see in terms of the daily traffic, and you know, the facts that the neighbors provide can provide reasons for adjusting a project, voting in favor, voting against, the facts that they provide. But if they come in and they say, my property value is going to go down,